This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. This show is still entirely supported by the contributions of listeners. If you want to keep it going, please go to unregisteredlisteners.com. When you become a subscriber, you'll have access to a private Facebook group where you can talk with me and with guests from the show. You'll also get discounts on Unregistered and Renegade University merchandise. Again, to support this show, to keep these conversations going, please go to unregisteredlisteners.com. This past weekend was the first event for Renegade University. It was a weekend in Salem, Massachusetts. And I was pretty sure it would go well. I was very excited about it. I wasn't nervous about it. I was pretty confident that intellectually it would be interesting and useful for people and for me, but I didn't expect that emotionally it would be overwhelming. As you'll hear, I was just blown away that 30 people would fly across the country or drive across the country and spend money just to sit with me over a weekend and talk about ideas and history and politics and, at the end of the weekend, themselves. So what you're about to hear is the questions and answers at the very end of the weekend that people who are participants had for me. And they had them, the questions were about politics and history and ideas, but they ended up really being about their own lives and their own histories. And I was simply overwhelmed that this was happening. And I thought it was a revolution going on, or the beginning of one, for higher education. I already knew that's what's happening, but it was clearly a revolution for me and my life. So here is the last event in the first event in the history of Renegade University, Salem, Massachusetts. It's introduced by Brett Veinotte of the School Sucks Project, who was the co-sponsor and co-organizer of it. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the podcast for Renegade University and School Sucks Project present A Weekend with Thaddeus Russell. Hello, everyone. Hello. Yeah. Perfect. All our pre-show prep paid off. Hey, Thad.
Hey, man.
So I really think that we picked a wonderful place, a series of wonderful places to have this event. And last night, a group of us, I think at one point we were 14 deep, walking through the town after we ate dinner at my favorite restaurant. It was exactly the night that I pictured when I thought about doing the event in Salem. We went and we ate at my favorite restaurant at the longest table, maybe in the history of the town. And then we all walked all over the town. We went down to the water. We walked out to the lighthouse. It was just a magical evening, and it really made my weekend to be able to do that last night. So I forgot to mention that this morning. And I was saying to the group that one of the reasons why the town was significant for me, I said this morning, I came here a leftist, a liberal, a socialist conspiracy theorist. And 2 years later, just 2 years later, after a lot of new exposure and my introduction to the world of podcasting, I left this town an anarchist. Also, still a conspiracy theorist, but like a libertarian anarchist. So it was a very, very important place in my development.
I've only been here for 2 days, and I've already changed my mind on a few things.
That's awesome. What?
Because of these people we brought here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or the people who came here, I should say, on their own accord, which is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. So, yeah, I said to somebody during this weekend, I forget who it was, but, it's like, why doesn't every professor in the country want to leave their jobs right now and do this? Because just for one thing, everybody in the room who's there is your A+ student. Every single person is highly motivated. They've traveled across the country to be here, spent money to be here. They are curious, very curious. They're passionate about these things, that passionate that they would do all of that to come here.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to talk about ideas, the ideas that I'm interested in. I'm not kidding. It's just, why wouldn't you want to do that? It's been perfect. And then on top of that, as I've said to you before, your audience is especially smart and know a lot and are able to question me in ways that force me to rethink things. And that's exactly what happened this weekend. I've rethought a lot of things, and I actually have started to reframe some of my own arguments that I make publicly because of what's happened here. And you guys know I'm not kidding. That's really happened. But on top of that, I was able to test out things that I've never presented publicly before. So the lectures I gave today which are basically on the book that I'm writing that'll come out next year, that's never been spoken in public. I don't know if you guys knew that, but even my editor doesn't know a lot of what I said today. Even my girlfriend doesn't know what I said today. In many cases, I've never said those things publicly. I've certainly never presented any of that in that way. So I was testing it with you guys. That's why, I'm really, really curious to hear more about what you think about it, honestly, because pretty soon it's going to go in front of the whole public, and I can't imagine a better audience to test it in front of, because you guys are so sharp and uncompromising. I mean, I know that you appreciate what I say and think, but what I love about you the most is that you never you're never uncritical. I always feel like I have to be on my best game in front of you guys, in front of School Sucks people. Mm-hmm. It's true, because I will pay a price if I'm not, in a good way. And that's happened many, many times this weekend. I'm just always thinking as hard as I can, and because of who's in front of me.
Was there a particularly transformative experience?
Well, I mean, there were, we had several, I guess you would call it debates, about this whole postmodernist thing, the nature of truth and relativism and all that. And that's the big one where I really am going to start talking about it differently. It's not that I had sort of my fundamental ideas changed, but the way that I present them and the way that I frame them has changed. And I think I'm going to stick with that. It's sort of, they kind of taught me how best to present my ideas in that case. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be very useful for me. And then, on every other thing I've talked about this weekend, I just got the best questions you could imagine, because these are people who know my work, who know my ideas, or are just super smart and very curious and always ask the best and most difficult questions. Did I ever get a question that wasn't fantastic? I don't think so. Did I? I don't think so. I mean, no. Every single one of them, I said over and over again, I felt like a broken record. It's really true. I just said, gosh, that's a great question. I wish my normal students asked these questions like this. I mean, sometimes they do, but not nearly as consistently as you guys do. So no, it's the best. It's the best classroom you could ever be in.
Yeah, it's since you mentioned that, it's something about this didn't hit me until this morning. The contrast of doing something like this versus what I used to do, which in many cases was even, more forced than what you used to do. The kids who came to sit in front of you in a classroom were there voluntarily. I spent a lot of my career in front of kids where I'd walk in the room and the look on their face would just be like, fuck you. Mm-hmm. You're another stupid asshole adult. I've had enough of your kind, and that was what I was confronted with day after day as a teacher. And I was joking, most of the people I think in this room were there this morning when I walked in to just lead the warm-up session, and as a joke, I wrote my name. I wrote Mr. Veinotte on the dry erase board, and I said, this is actually like a flashback. But looking out at the people who are here, who endeavored to be here, who traveled on planes from Georgia and Florida, and someone from California, right? Yeah. And even like people who drove through fucking Massachusetts, to get here.
Camped out in a campground.
Yeah.
to be here. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I know.
Absolutely. So just that willingness, like being able to look out in a group of people in a classroom of willing faces is an amazing thing. It's not just true about an event like this; it's the whole podcasting world.
Yeah.
People come to me now, and
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
such a stark contrast to how I spent most of my career in finger quotes education.
Yeah, no, honestly, best teaching experience of my life. And I've had a lot of great ones, and I love teaching, always have. Love teaching. That's why I started this. That's why I started this whole profession 25 years ago. And I really do. I've had a lot of great students, but I've never had a whole classroom full of the best students. And I've never learned so much in so short a time. And yeah, I think this might be the beginning of something really big.
I think you would do this kind of format again?
Well, I told them on the very first day that I think this is historic. I know we're not Harvard yet, and Harvard's going to be around for a while, but it's pretty clear this is a movement that's starting. This is a small part of it, but it's a real part of it. These are people voluntarily, as you said, crossing the country, going way out of their way to learn, to talk, to think, to question, who don't have to be here at all. This is purely voluntary, who are going around the traditional structures of higher education and education generally. They're going around the traditional structures of the media. They're doing all of this directly, face-to-face, and I think that's what's happening, and I think it's pretty clear it's going to keep happening. I think there will be colleges closing their doors, not just because of this, but because of a much larger movement that this is a part of. I really think so. I think in 5 or 10 years, there's going to be a lot of colleges kind of pissed off at the people who pioneered this in a way this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, we were walking around.
At least I hope, but I really do see that happening. And it's not just because of me. I'm sure that many other people will see this as an example. And I've already had other examples too, by the way. This isn't, there are other people who have been doing this, like Tom Woods has been doing it, and a few others. But, this is definitely the beginning. And so the people here, I think they're doing something historic. They are doing something historic because we can put up our sign and our shingle and invite people, right? Mm-hmm. But they had to do it. So, God, I'm speechless.
Awesome. That's it. Yeah, and I really liked the social aspect of it too. Like doing it in person, I think is very cool. And there was like this Socratic appeal when we were, we spent some time in what is a traditional classroom setting as far as just the layout and the environment, and then we'd go out and we'd wander through the streets.
Yeah, that's right.
And we'd talk.
That's exactly
and
right.
There would be more discussion
trees, but otherwise, yeah, it was.
Yeah, yeah,
it was like that. That's right. Yeah, it was free form, and I just was talking. I talked to everybody, and we talked to each other, and it was all high level and fun and fascinating.
Awesome. Yeah,
and challenging, which is what it should be.
Indeed,
this is what higher education should be. I think it will be.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So what we're aiming to do between now and 6 o'clock is bring some of the people from the event up to a third mic and let them ask questions. So before you came this morning, we did a warm up, and I asked people to brainstorm some difficult questions they thought would be difficult, or curiosities that they had, or things that could open up interesting conversations. I said before we started that this is going to be controlled by time, which is very, very important to me because I want to make sure that everybody who wants to come up here and sit at the seat has a chance to do so. So our first participant is going to be Alex.
Yeah, Alex. How's it going?
Uh-oh. Trouble.
I'm
scared of you, Alex.
Yeah?
Go easy.
Alex, how old are you?
No, don't go easy.
I am 24.
Yeah, so this story needs to be told, first of all.
Okay.
Alex. I've met a lot of people. I mean, I want you to tell it. I'm setting you up, but I've met a lot of people since I started working with you, Brett, actually literally across the country who have and I had no idea about this. I would say, so how do you know about me? And they said, oh, because of School Sucks. And I say, oh, cool. That's great. I get so many people like you who heard about me from School Sucks and Brett Veinotte. So then I say, so where'd you go to school? And they say, well, I didn't. And I say, oh, wow, okay, cool. And there's a part of me, I have to admit, that's still kind of indoctrinated and think that's maybe, there's that little piece of me that like gets nervous about that. And they say, yeah, because of Brett, I didn't go to college. And then I'll say, okay, cool. So what are you doing? And it's almost always something more impressive than what was doing, certainly at that age and maybe ever since. I've met so many people here who are doing things that are like brave, and inventive and creative and amazing, creating whole careers from nothing or from themselves instead of depending on these institutions. So, I think Alex was one of those first people I met this weekend, and I think that was your story, right? Like I asked you that, and I said, "How'd you hear about me?" Or you heard about me through Brett, and you took that evil path that he's leading so many children down.
I did.
Yeah.
I decided to join the dark side.
Nice.
And not follow the path of the light to my college degree and my 9-to-5 job for my 40 years with my pension waiting for me at the end. Yeah, so I feel like where to start? Kindergarten, I think I wanted to be a firefighter or a spaceman like most people. Maybe by 5th grade, I was going to be a PhD. Because unlike you two, I was like an A, B student.
Wow.
Probably still had some of that oppositional defiant disorder. Luckily, did not get put on any pills or anything like that. So kind of, I don't know. I didn't necessarily hate school, didn't like it. I kind of was okay at the game. People told me I was smart. So I thought, oh, I'm smart. PhD, that's what smart people do. And by 18, I was not going to college, and I was going to be this big world-changing entrepreneur. And so I think that turn sort of happened in high school. I was about 16 or 17, kind of getting into the libertarian thing, listening to some of those podcasts. And Brett actually showed up on a couple of them, Free Talk Live, Free Domain Radio. And I was like sort of getting towards the end of high school, kind of in that teenaged, angsty kind of realm. And I think I was always smart, quote unquote, and I believed that. And I was sort of in this questioning period of life. And then this guy, Brett Veinotte, starts talking about how much school sucks. And he's a lot older than me. And he starts talking about how maybe it's not such a great idea to go to college. Maybe you don't have to go to college. And over a couple of years between him saying that explicitly and just other ideas sort of developing, experiences happening, by the time I left high school, I was not going to go to college at all.
That is an awesome story. I mean, that was like one of the things that I was really shooting for at the beginning of the show, which was like, when I was a teenager, what if somebody at the front of the room said the things that I thought from my desk? So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, the other thing about these people I'm meeting, the young ones, the ones that like Alex, is that without fail so far, every single one of them would run circles around most Harvard faculty intellectually. They are so much more sophisticated than most people in those universities. That is not an exaggeration. I will put any one of these people up against any faculty anytime on politics or philosophy or theory. I'll put all my money. I'm just not kidding. These are the smart, this. These are incredibly smart and sophisticated people. Why? Because they're guided entirely by their curiosity. That's why they're here. That's why they came across the country, just because of their curiosity. And they want to get to the bottom of these things. That's why they're the best students. That's why that's an intellectual. That's the best intellectual. Kids that you said that my students in the regular colleges are there voluntarily, not exactly, right? Because there are requirements and because all college students go to college for a variety of reasons. And I'll tell you, not one of those reasons has ever been to study with Thaddeus Russell. They don't know I exist, when they apply, and they usually just stumble upon me, and then it might go well, but that's the best I get. So, but in this case, every single person here, I'm pretty sure, unless there's like some real mistaken identity going on, is here just to talk about ideas with me and with you. And
right.
So, yeah, I'll put any of them up against any famous professor any day of the week in a debate. I mean that.
So you have an idea to share?
I do. I actually have like a whole little piece of paper with various things like climate change, essentialism. How do you explain Building 7?
Whoa. Oh, fuck. I forgot that this was going to be... Can we pick that one? I mean, would you mind
I'm
if
good
we
with
just
that.
lasered in on something?
I'm good with that.
One of the things that I was spoken to, right, from a few people in my audience, because I did like a pre-show in the Patreon version of the unregistered episode I was on. I had some pre-show where we were talking before we started, and Thad compares 9/11 truthers to flat earthers.
Oh no.
And people were like, there is a hierarchy.
Are you sure I compared them? I think I just included them in the same
There was a
category.
conflation. There was a conflation.
Yeah, okay.
And
That's a little different, though.
More than one person said, there's a hierarchy.
Okay.
They're not on the same plane.
Yeah. And, okay, here's one of the things I learned this weekend. In fact, this was fairly early in the weekend, as I recall, right? Someone said this to me, and I said, oh, no, okay, you're right. Let me think about that again. I did it. I was very casual, I think, when this happened on the podcast. And I was, thinking about something else, and I just very quickly lumped those all together. And when I was forced to rethink that by you guys this weekend, I realized that I don't actually think that. And here's what I do think. I think there is very clearly, for me, a hierarchy among those things. And the thing is, and I said this to some of you guys, in fact, that the so-called 9/11 truthers, the politics behind any so-called conspiracy theory is what's most important to me. Whether or not it's true factually is less important than what's driving this theory, what's behind it, what's the politics behind it, and what are the objectives or the fears or the concerns of the people who are speaking these theories, right? So for me, the 9/11 truthers have always been maybe the best so-called conspiracy theorists because the politics of it and really the argument of it is essentially the same as mine, which is that 9/11 served the interests of the federal government of the United States, in particular the Bush administration, and in particular the neoconservatives who were running the foreign policy of that administration. So I have said in my own lectures in Ivy League classrooms for years and years and years that 9/11 was the best thing that ever happened to the Bush administration and to the American empire.
And to a lot of powerful first world governments.
For sure. And so that has always seemed pretty clear to me that sentiment, that it's not a sentiment, it's an idea, it's an analysis actually of the workings and needs of government is what's behind so-called 9/11 truthers, right?
Yeah.
So not only do I put them at the very top of so-called conspiracy theories, but I feel in alliance with them. How's that? Have I won yet?
I
think I won, Alex.
Can
I think it's time to go now.
You might have.
I think there's probably a lot that you wanted.
No, how do I explain Building 7?
Wanted, right?
Yeah.
That you wanted, but that's the thing. Like, there's a lot you probably wanted out of that question, but why do you go through the Building 7 doorway? Like, why is that important to you?
To be honest, that question was entirely a joke.
Oh,
I was just brainstorming, and this was just a classic question. What about Building 7?
all right. In 20 seconds, I think Building 7 is a red herring. I think it was. I think that there's lots. First of all, I'm not a physicist. I'm not an engineer. I really think you do see evidence of the building slowly collapsing long before it appears
sinks
to
in the
fall.
middle first.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What's going on here?
Wait, we're good. Wait. I'm just real quick. Because
No, I don't
people
care
are
about
not-
you anymore. I'm done with you.
But people
Alex,
are interested in Building
what
7.
do you think about that? Wait, what is your? I don't know. What is your actual position on this? Do you have one? Or do you,
Oh, my actual position on it? I would say I tend to agree with you. 9/11 was actually kind of one of those like steps to libertarianism for me, like it is a lot of people. Yeah, and so it was entirely a joke until Brett was like, let's stay on this.
No, but I mean, I have just seen. Okay, all right, sorry. I've seen no evidence that the Bush administration actually planted explosives.
that
That's
far.
framing it
7.
wrong. That's framing it. That's making a straw man out of it.
See
to
what I'm
say
learning? I'm learning something already. Yeah.
Right, because people say the government, the people at the people who are
How
at the
many people would have
DMV,
to be
like those are
involved?
really weak arguments that kind of straw man looking into it, like really as the possibility of, was it an intelligence operation? Was it multiple intelligence agencies working together on something like, was it something else? Is there some shadow government?
But wait a second. If we're talking about Building 7,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's one thing about the hijackers being part of some intelligence operation.
Yeah.
That makes a little bit of sense to me.
Sure.
Again, there's no evidence of this, but whatever, it's fine. But Building 7 would be planting explosives. Am I right? You know, like U.S.
think that's
personnel actually.
One of the dominant theories.
Yeah.
probably.
So Alex, what do you think about that?
So I am actually I was super into it. I was in third grade when 9/11 happened. I actually
Me too. That's
am one of
funny.
the yeah
We have so much in common.
yeah third grade. We both went to third grade during 9/11. Yeah, so I remember it kind of on the young side, but I did have that "where were you when Kennedy died" kind of moment with 9/11. Dad was a libertarian by that point, so that was actually a big bonding thing for us, was these Loose Change and all these 9/11 documentaries. Super interesting to me at the time, part of how I became a renegade and a rebel. At this point, to me, it's just sort of it's a question. I don't necessarily believe the mainstream narrative, but I also don't assume anything about who did it, why they did it, how it actually happened.
I have no idea. Yeah, exactly. What actually
Nanothermite,
happened.
energy weapons.
Oh yeah,
these
energy
things.
weapons. They did.
Yeah.
It's solved.
From
Solved.
space. From space.
Is that
from
one
space.
of the
That is one
theories?
Judy Wood.
Oh, wow. She has a name.
Yep. You've got about 3 minutes left. If you had a more serious, quick question that you wanted to ask,
Can't we
please.
extend his time a little bit?
If we break the rules with the first
With
person,
one, it's gonna.
I don't get veto power here or anything. It's
how much extra time? do you
Alex,
wanna
talk quick. We're
Yeah.
running out of
Okay.
time.
Okay. Cool. So, real questions. Do you want to stay away from postmodern? I actually have a smash postmodernism with Renegade / Blood and Freedom. If you want to do that one.
Ooh, hell yeah.
Okay. So
That's what I live for.
my understanding from mostly things I've learned from Brett and some from you is that postmodernism kind of has some roots in Frankfurt School. I'm sure they go back further than that. My understanding of Frankfurt School is that kind of has roots in basically this idea of, okay, so this Holocaust thing just happened. How the fuck did that go down? And what are sort of the roots of that in our culture? And sort of analysis, that's where you get into deconstruction. How do we tear down this society that made that possible? So one of the things
critical theory with them.
critical theory.
Deconstruction was later.
Oh, separate. Yeah. Okay.
French.
Okay. So critical theory. And so if that comes from the Holocaust, one of the things you talked about, if I can reveal a premise from your upcoming book, was if the United States would have accepted Germany's offer to take in the Jews that they didn't want, there wouldn't have been a Holocaust. So if that had happened and there wasn't a Holocaust, what would that mean for postmodernism?
Oh, boy.
What do you think that would mean?
I've never gotten any question close to that from students I've had in quality, depth, and sophistication and difficulty.
I can take the answer off mic too.
Yeah, so, okay. And I don't want you to leave.
Okay.
So, all right. So as Brett said, the people we call postmodernists now, both they're people who hate them and people who like them, agree that when we talk about postmodernists, we're referring to, well, actually, I'm not so sure anymore with people like Jordan Peterson. But anyway, generally, that's French intellectuals in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Okay.
Most notably Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. And there's some others too who are lesser lights, but also important in some ways. But those two are the big ones. So they're not, Derrida was Jewish, but he obviously wasn't a Holocaust refugee, and Foucault was not Jewish, and they weren't German. So that, I mean, the Frankfurt School, okay, that's really important. So this, I think, is what's going on right now in the world that all of us are living in the podcast world, is that there's a very terrible conflation, sloppy, and I'm going to say lazy, and maybe even dangerous conflation of the Frankfurt School with the French postmodernists. So the Frankfurt School, no, it's all good. I mean, that's why we do this, right?
I just did it.
To talk about it. No, it's great. And so the Frankfurt School was, as you or both of you were saying, were in fact, yes, Holocaust refugees in the 30s and 40s from Germany mostly, people like Horkheimer and Adorno. And the Frankfurt School, my analysis of them is that they were essentially totalitarian, that the politics of the Frankfurt School were horrific. And when people talk about postmodernism these days, it sounds like they're describing the Frankfurt School. Now, the postmodernists, the Foucaults and the Derridas of the world, were somewhat sympathetic to the Frankfurt School, but they did a very different thing. Here's what the fundamental difference is. The Frankfurt School guys were essentialists. They were essentialists in every way. They believed in material reality. They believed that there was such a thing as American mass culture, and here's one of the reasons I'm obviously opposed to them. Adorno's most famous critique is of mass culture. Very, very famous critique. He thought that all the stuff that I talk about in Renegade, TV and movies and jazz and rock and roll and all the rest of it, was making Americans dumb sheep who would be easily manipulated by authoritarians, that it would pave the way for a dictator, a bad dictator. And what they needed instead was a very smart, preferably German philosopher dictator named Theodor Adorno, who would tell them that what they really need is a global collectivist society. I mean, read it yourself. I mean, I don't think this is even debatable. That's essentially what Adorno and Horkheimer and company were arguing for.
So they would have carried the Marxist false consciousness banner as a problem forward.
They invented the concept of false consciousness. They were the first to use that term and that concept. They are the opposite of everything I stand for. So they also were moral absolutists, not moral relativists. They believed that capitalism was an evil. They believed that Hollywood was evil in different ways than conservatives did, but still evil, right? And they wanted to replace it with something that they thought was a true universal absolute good, which was essentially socialism. They didn't get into great detail about what the socialism would look like, their utopia, but they were definitely socialists. They were collectivists, no doubt about it. And Marcuse was the worst of them all, Herbert Marcuse. But he was actually more explicit about it and talked about a sudden revolution in which everyone would stop working and start cooperating and collectivizing all of society. The postmodernists, as we all know, whether you hate this or love this, were anti-essentialists. They said there is no such thing as a universal morality. There is no such thing as a universal truth, right? And they had no particular position one way or another on any of these great moral questions. They just were trying to describe how power operated. So to me, anybody, and the Frankfurt School were clearly inheritors of Marx, and they called themselves Marxists or post-Marxists, and they've been always categorized as within the Marxist tradition. Also, the arch materialist of our era, Marx, right? Society is arranged according to its material conditions. He's the essentialist materialist of all time. This is why Marxists, including the Frankfurt School guys, have despised the postmodernists. They hate those guys. When I first heard about postmodernists, it was from a Marxist in New York City when I was in graduate school at Columbia, who said this: "Oh, up at Columbia in graduate school, are you reading that French horse shit?" They hated it because the postmodernists just pulled the rug out from under all of these universal claims that Marxists were making about the working class and about truth and goodness. For one thing, there's no such thing as a working class or a class of anybody, right? Instead, you guys, I'm sure, understand this. It's a collection of individuals, or at least there certainly may be commonalities, but to put all people, millions of people at a time, sometimes billions of people at a time into one single category is to do, I think, and postmodernists have said this, by the way, Foucault has actually said this, is to do violence to people, to ideas, to concepts, to freedom, right? You're eliminating vast swaths of human experience by putting people into that category, and also makes them easier to manipulate when you do that. So the postmodernists actually were among the first to call out the Frankfurt School and the Marxists on this very thing. So you can hate the postmodernists still, but don't conflate them with Marxists or the Frankfurt School.
Awesome.
Cool.
Alex, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
Alex,
you.
That was the best. Thank you.
And this is, I'm sorry, the name again? Jay. Jay just showed up today. Hey, Jay, and you came from Connecticut?
Well, this morning I did.
Yeah.
I was working a couple weddings, and late night last night, late night the night before that, and then I hit the road this morning. And
Jay has two jobs, 2 kids,
2 jobs, 2 kids,
And a wife.
and I'm in school full time
Oh my-
online
no, you're-
as well.
no, come
I forgot
on.
to mention that. Yes.
Oh my
For
God.
what?
Yeah. What Paul's doing right here.
Oh, awesome.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm
Audio- which
my
is
second,
audio
engineering.
engineering,
Audio
yeah,
engineering.
okay.
Yeah, it's my second degree in that. So,
Cool.
and actually,
Which is just an I think I said this to you. It's a double honor that you're here. I mean, it's amazing to me.
I might be half asleep right now, and I might stumble a little bit just because.
That's fine. Have you ever been on a podcast before?
No.
Then
Hey, here we
Not
go.
that I can remember.
whatever you do,
You
as
seem
long
like
as
a
you stay
natural
about
to me.
this
I don't
far
know.
away from the mic, whatever you do is going to be great.
I do voiceover work on the side, so just say.
You do. You have
I
a
could
really good
tell
voice.
you
Mr.
were- I
Microphone.
could tell you were a pro. Really.
Will you say some things?
What would you need?
Say the name of my show.
The School Sucks podcast.
Now say it like differently, like in a different mood.
The School Sucks podcast.
Oh, either way,
I
that's
could
great.
do character voices if you want. Whatever.
Can you do
whatever need.
impressions?
Sure. What do you need?
But who's your favorite impression to do?
Oh gosh, I'm not really sure right now. What
Peter Griffin.
I don't know if I can do PETA. Sorry, but that's not really my forte. But I should probably stop.
All right.
Anyways, my question. I know
hired.
I don't have a lot of time.
Thank you
so,
for
but-
being but thank you for being able to do an impression on the spot like that. I would never be able to do that. But so thank you. You are a professional.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. And proceed.
So, I've been a fan of both you guys for quite some time. Introduced to Thaddeus from your podcast as well as Rogan and other spots that I've seen your stuff on. But unfortunately, based on my schedule, I don't have tons of time to read. There was a time when I was able to read because I enjoyed it. But as I'm also as an educator myself, I'm interested in your own choices as a parent for your children and what's coming up for their futures. I'm hazy on the age of
My son?
your son.
15, almost 16.
Okay, so I'm sure you've got some rather interesting decisions to make.
Your kids are 8 and
8 and 2.
2, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, things are going to change significantly for my 2 boys, but I'm imagining that you already have the trajectory in front of you for what lies ahead for your son.
Or you mean behind me?
Or I'm sorry. Well,
I see what's going to happen to you. You mean like?
well, well, yeah,
Is that what you
perhaps.
mean?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm interested in what you are, I guess, gazing into on your crystal ball for your son's future.
Oh.
And what advice you might have for parents who will be challenged or are currently challenged with the concerns and pressures of, the college application process, and even prior to that, pre-K through 12. What with everything changing the way that it is, and what all the work that Brett's doing and others like both of you, what do you see happening in the future for folks?
No, so that's why I came here, so I could learn the answer to that question, because I don't know, and the people around me in this room know much better than I do. In particular, there's a couple people I'm looking at right now who I was just talking to about this very question, who are also parents and fans of Brett, and who are unschoolers, and a thing I've just learned about only because of Brett and because of you guys. So I'm learning this, and as I told them, it's parenting for me, and I think for them and a lot of us, is just groping through the dark all the time. Scrambling, trying to figure this thing out, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done by far. And so I don't know, and I really am learning. And honestly, it's School Sucks, and this whole community is teaching me to think again about all of it. So the story with my son is that when he was born, I didn't know about any of this, and I was no fan of school or public school, certainly, but I didn't think it was prison necessarily. It's incredible. God, when I think about that now, that was me just 15 years ago. That's right. I did not think of it as prison, which I do now. And, the neighborhood we lived in Brooklyn had this really supposedly, groovy, yuppie, liberal school that everybody went to. And it was really cool. And everybody went to 321 and it was awesome. And in fact, you went through all sorts of hoops to get your kids into that school. And that's where we sent my son, and of course, I suppose relative to a dungeon. I don't know, it's fine, whatever. But it's also actually where I learned. That's true. And now that I think about it, that's right. It was observing his kindergarten class. That's right. That's where I learned the thing that I've talked about on Brett's podcast and in the video I did with him called Breaking Horses. Because I saw on the first day that what they did was make all the kids line up. That was the very first thing. Make them line up, and then make them sit at their desks, and then make them wait to speak. It didn't really dawn on me that that's what happens in kindergarten. And I've actually been telling my students ever since then that thing. I say to them, sorry guys, but I hate to break it to you. What they're doing in those classrooms is breaking horses. So, but it took me a long time to get to that. And now he's still there, and I don't know.
Are you already having those conversations though, where what do you want to do? Are you making choices yet at that point, or are you advising him to take time?
Okay. So here's the problem always for me. It's always been, sure, unschooling, homeschooling sounds awesome and I'm all for it and God bless those people and please keep doing it. I don't have the time.
Yeah.
I don't have, I don't have the energy.
Yeah.
And so I'd always say this to people, but and certainly where I was have been in California, Southern California recently, and in New York City, I just never knew of any community. Right. So it's just about that. It's just about building or finding a community that I think you can do it with. I don't know. I mean, again, that's why I'm here. I don't have that answer, but I do know this. Just like with higher education, the more we keep doing this, the easier it will be to go around those institutions and just have our own education system. Right. So that's my only answer is just I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm just hanging out with you guys and people like you and looking for this. I mean, it's probably too late for my son, but the good news is that he's known this all along, or at least for a long time. So he's totally cynical about school. And I've made it very clear to him, hey, this is just something we have to get through with as little pain as possible. I think that most of this will be useless for you. Let's just get through it and as easily as we can. And then when you're done, you'll be free.
I'm having those conversations at 8. I'm concerned if that's doing damage and having those conversations that early.
That's a really good question because I mean I'm thinking with Thaddeus, and he has somebody that he co-parents with who might have very different attitudes about the public school or might just be indifferent to it. And one of the things that I've learned through the work that I used to do and the conversations I've had doing the show over the last 8 years is that eventually, in some cases, you are having conversations about school survival, right? And that's the way forward. You also have to, it's obviously on a case-by-case basis, individual by individual basis. What is the decompression period of leaving school? 10, 12,000 hours into the process? What is that decompression period for that teen going to look like, going to feel like? What are they going to be able to self-direct, anytime in the near future after just being led around for so long? And I'm just trying to talk about this carefully without making any generalizations, but why are you having these conversations already with an 8-year-old? I mean, what has happened? I guess I'm not questioning your intention. I'm saying what has happened outside or in the school that has made you feel these are necessary conversations.
So I'm challenged because I came up as a public school kid. I grew up in Hampton. I went to Winnacunnet, and
great, that was our rival, my high school rival.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to bring it up, but death to all Blue Hawks. Just saying. No big deal. We were undefeated in football, but those were the glory days, a long time ago. But I tried to do the whole choose your own adventure thing and design my own education back then. I was basically great in electives, great in creative courses, failed miserably in academics, and then just was saying, well, you're not really challenging me enough, so I'm just not going to go to school anymore. But I eked it through and did what I had to do and got the diploma and et cetera, et cetera. But so I didn't really have the greatest experience, but I would say that I look back and say, high school was a good time. But I didn't get what I could have potentially walked away with if things went differently. So I kind of had a mixed feeling about it myself, but now I work in a private K through 12 institution.
Right.
Totally different climate, potentially more freedom in terms of curriculum design, et cetera, but they're still taking federal money. So therefore they still have to adhere to specific standards.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right. And so certain initiatives are adapted. It's still preaching the same message for the most part that you're seeing everywhere else. So that private public thing is not really as clear as people might think on the consumer end of things, I would say.
Right. Because there still is an accountability problem in private school because
accreditation.
There's that. I mean, there's the accountability that comes that you have to the government, right? But there's still what I found a lack of accountability when it comes to the actual customers, which is the parents and obviously the students.
Absolutely.
Parents, by and large, from my experience, have this attitude. Because, I mean, I went on not to just teach at a private school, but to work with kids who went to private schools. And the parents said, yeah, that's where they go to school. The teachers figure that out there. Right. So I was continuously surprised by what people would shell out to send their kids to these schools and then have very little investment or attention to what was actually going on in the school. So there's that lack of accountability problem.
So are you having issues with your 8-year-old? Is this manifesting itself in any way?
Well, here's the thing. Or
are you trying to figure out what to do for the next 10 years?
So he's at I don't have enough time to get into the dynamic, but he's my stepson, and there's an interesting dynamic with the family there. Mm-hmm. He's had a rough start, let's just say. Mm-hmm. And we've moved a few times, and he's bounced around, incredibly bright, very quick, slickest reader in every class he's been in. However, the concerns that I have are just finding the right fit for him, and he's not actually a student at the school that I work for. Mm-hmm. And I made that choice on his behalf based on the way I see things going. So we are also in that time constraint zone with home education solutions. Scheduling, as you know, is just not going to make that possible. However, I want to make sure that he has every opportunity possible to get what he needs. And I fear that if we just go run of the mill with any of these decisions, he's going to just end up on the same path and repeating history. And I don't like to repeat history, if it's negative, at least.
All I can say is, again, like I assume if there was a fairly well-developed community of people doing unschooling or homeschooling in your area, this would be a lot easier. Am I right?
Probably, potentially.
Maybe you could. I know your time is very, very tight, right? But somehow, I would imagine you and your partner or someone could contribute 5 or 10 or 15 hours a week, maybe something like that. That seems more reasonable, at least.
And we do that,
which is only possible when you scale, right?
It's supplemental, if anything.
Yeah, and so if you did it with a larger group of people, that becomes very possible. I mean,
sure.
That's it. And so again, it's unfortunately for you and me, seems to me a cultural issue.
Yes.
In other words,
yes,
people are going to benefit directly materially when the culture shifts significantly, but it's not there yet. So all we can do is talk into microphones
and wait.
But that's not that is the best thing to be doing. And we are able to do that now because of technology, et cetera. Sure. And keep talking and broadcasting this message until it happens. And who knows, for your son in the next 10 years, I could see it happening. I could see it happening in just a few years, or maybe even next year. It could happen. I bet there are communities somewhere. You know this, I'm sure.
Have you looked into that?
A little bit, yeah. And I mean, the conversations have been small, but we have made a few connections with some folks. But I think that there's also this kind of hesitation because I've been indoctrinated myself, right? Where
right. I know,
you have that kind of.
I know. I got it too. I'm scared of it. I know. I'm scared.
A little bit.
But less scared now, I'll tell you that much.
Absolutely.
Way
Same.
less scared.
And I would agree. Yes.
I think the biggest step forward that you can take, this is a really significant step, is having honest conversations about what school is and validating the feelings that a young person has about that experience. Nobody did that for me. Nobody probably did that for most of us. It's the I just watched somebody go through nursing school, right? And these people, I've never seen a more blatant example of one generation just transferring their pain to another, using the justification, it was done to me, so I'm normalizing it by doing it to you. That is like they say nurses eat their own, right? Sure. But I think that's true. I think that's the justification that a lot of parents use for school as well. You know, this happened to me, and spanking, right? So paying attention to those emotions and validating them and you know, having honest conversations about like, this is what school was for me. And even, you know, I mean, it's a hard thing to say to an 8-year-old because I think they lack the foresight or the experience to say, we're working on this and we hope it won't always be this way. Like if somebody said that to me when I was 8, I would be like, okay, so like, will it be different in 15 minutes or 2 years? Or so that's a difficult conversation to have. But the most important thing is to, you know, hear and acknowledge.
So didn't you ask originally, or didn't you say you were worried that would do damage to your kid? Because here's what I think.
Like how deep to dig,
so
essentially.
Here's what happens with me, right? So I am pretty honest with my son and I try to lay it out for him. But of course the downside there is, well, that I'm told by the co-parent is that, oh, well, that just pulls the motivation, right? That he won't work hard, that he'll fail and he'll do poorly and then his life will be worse because of it. Well, first of all, that hasn't been shown to be true because sometimes he works hard and sometimes he doesn't. And I don't know. I think he does what he would do anyway. But here's the bigger thing that never gets talked about, which is that it's the fucking truth.
Right.
Do you want to tell your kids the truth?
Right.
Or do you want to pretend that the world is radically different than you yourself actually see it?
And I have that same conversation with my wife where it's like, I can't lie to him. Like, we're not going to lie.
By the way, when I do this, I actually use the word fucking because that's how I actually talk.
Yes.
So that is, you know, yeah. So, you know, no, I don't believe in a universal truth, but that's my truth.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you.
It's still hard.
Yeah.
But that's your choice, right?
This is a conversation that we could have for an hour. So if you wanted to have it in the future, we should.
Absolutely.
Oh, totally.
I would really
Anytime.
appreciate that.
Seriously.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate it.
Parenting is like, that's the thing I think I most want to talk about right now, like publicly. Yeah, I want to do that.
And you know who we should include in the conversation if we have one? A parent, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally. Yes.
But thank you so much, Jay. Thank you
guys.
for a great question. I really appreciate it. Who's next? All right. We're bringing Daniel up. Wait, what do you call him?
I call him Danny.
Danny.
I've been calling him Danny for a long time, at least for 24 hours.
I really have no preference.
I'm looking for a line from The Shining. Nothing's coming.
Danny boy.
Danny. I don't remember anything. Wait.
How much time do we have?
We got, I don't know. I'm giving everybody 15 minutes plus time to wrap it up.
There's another person after Danny?
Phil.
Phil.
Kevin.
Okay.
So we got a half an hour left after this. Why?
Because I have work to do with Danny.
Okay.
Like right now.
Okay.
Well, now and hopefully for a long time after this too. But
okay. Begin.
All right, well, you're going to have to inform me of this work because I wasn't notified.
I told you about it. I told you what you should be doing now. So Danny, you know, is like another one of these people who's
where are you from, by the way?
Oh, I'll tell you. I'll tell you where he's from.
Go for it.
No. Okay, you do it.
I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes.
Yes, that wonderful city on the shittiest lake in the world.
Oh, okay. So can I talk about what you told me about just what you do at night?
Absolutely.
Cool. You know, so once again, I'm in front of someone who says that they essentially, I mean, you went to community college, but you didn't really go to college. And it was a pretty conscious decision not to do the college thing, and largely or entirely because of this guy over here, right? Or just at least this movement, right?
Yeah.
And here you are, man, traveling halfway across the country to talk about big ideas. It's ridiculous.
All right.
In the best way. So I'm just so curious about what could possibly create a human being like this. And I said, well, So what do you? Oh yeah, you said something about how your schedule's really late. You stay up really late, and it's a problem. Blah blah blah. And I said, well, what are you doing like late at night? He said, oh well, I work late. And I said, really? He said, where? I said, where do you work? He said, pizza parlor. I said, there's an early morning pizza parlor in Cleveland. And he said, no, I just stay after work and hang out with a guy who works there, and we drink beer and talk for hours, and then I come home, and that's it, and that's my life, and it's in Cleveland too. So here's the quick take that almost everyone on the coasts would have about you, is that you're the worst, biggest loser in the world.
Not
and
wrong.
that you will amount to nothing ever, and that there's no reason to pay attention to you except as a statistic, maybe in a poll of American opinions about things, so that we can decide how to shape our policy, how best to manipulate you. Anyway, so here's the thing, Danny. You have all these ideas, and in fact, I did an AMA and Ask Me Anything episode a couple months ago for my podcast, and I got one question from someone named Daniel McCarthy, which was really 10 questions in one. It was about Plato and the CIA and hallucinogenics in the 1960s, and was blowback theory in there too? I forget. It was about 10 different big questions, big drunk. Questions, huge questions about stuff that I really care about, that I'm really curious about. Well, that everyone should be, because they're huge questions that are incredibly consequential in our lives, all of us. And I told you this. I read your questions aloud to my girlfriend and the guy who's my partner and does my audio in Oregon. And I said, listen, look what I'm getting. Look who my fans are. How can I possibly answer this on? And we sort of were laughing at you, but also sort of like amazed, you know? It's like, whoa, these people are curious about the biggest, best things, and they're just can't wait to get it out, you know? So I said to you the other night, what are you going to do about that? Because you work at a pizza parlor in Cleveland. And you said, I just want to write books like you and Brett, or have podcasts and books and write books like you and Brett do. I want to talk about the things that you and Brett do. And I said, well, yeah, you should just do it. And you were like, well, but I work in a pizza parlor. And I said, so here's the thing, like, that's an amazing thing that you do that. And I would love to just have you open the door, you know, so that I could just see in, right? And I can't believe you came here to do this. You and your girlfriend, Alice, I cannot believe it. And you haven't been to college and you live in Cleveland, and you have the ideas that I've always had, or the curiosity that I've always had. But you didn't go to a college, and you didn't go to Columbia University, and you don't have an agent for your books, and you don't have a podcast, and you don't have anything. But you just keep doing it. And you camp in a campground so that you can't do it. Okay, so here's something I haven't said to all of you all weekend. I've been meaning to tell you, and I haven't said it, but I mostly wanted to say it to Danny. So here's the one accomplishment I haven't had in my career that I care about. I never got it. I've done pretty much everything else I really need to do. I've written books and taught in fancy universities, and I have a podcast and all that. The thing I've never had is a student who went all the way. I've never had a student who took those ideas and those curiosities and those questions, and after college, after they were with me, kept asking them and kept going and kept going. And whether they got a PhD or started a podcast or wrote a book or had a graphic novel like Harvey P. Cars, who whose graphic novels are about a life that looks a lot like yours, and you reminded me immediately of him. He just opens a window into the life of a person who has a big mind in a small place like Cleveland. Not one single student in 25 years of teaching has ever gone on to do anything in my field, asking those questions, answering those questions, beyond college. They feel like once graduation happens, they're done, I guess. I don't know. It's just never happened. It's the one thing I've always wanted, I've never had. I've always heard about these people who have proteges or whatever. And I don't want a protege. I just want to see the results in the world from what I do. So when I met you, that's what I was thinking. I want you to answer those questions yourself, but what I want is to do what I can to help people like you just keep going. So I would just say, just open a door to everyone to your pizza parlor at night. I know you think it's mundane. You told me that, and not worthy of anyone's attention. I think it's fascinating, completely fascinating, that you continue to do this in that place. And just tell people about that. And then from there, you can broaden it and connect it to bigger issues.
Right.
So, yeah. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing this. I mean, if it weren't for this event, I'd be in that goddamn pizza parlor right now. So instead, I get to be here with you guys having these conversations. So that's your educative moment there. I mean, sure, there's no protege involved or whatever, but you're doing what it sounds like you're saying you want to do. Just by having things like this, by setting up events like this, I know there'll be more, and you should do the next one in Cleveland.
I'm considering it.
That would be
Do it at
great.
the pizza parlor.
Right on. I'll talk to the owners about it.
Do you have a question? I upstaged you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
I want to answer your questions.
Well, I had like 6, but I think 2 of them can kind of wait because they pertain more to the talk from earlier, more to just detailed stuff. But I was wondering, this still does pertain to the topic from your talk earlier on World War II. But are you familiar with the work, I'm sure you are, of Anthony Sutton?
Slightly.
And, well, the book...
Look at this. Look what he's doing already. He's teaching me something I should know already.
This is exciting. This is I'm very excited about this question.
Well, what made me think of it was you were talking about how FDR had said, after he got into office, almost immediately, that basically war with Germany is inevitable. And his cabinet seemed to agree. But at that same time and after that, these big American business magnates like Henry Ford and the Rockefellers, they didn't just give moral support to Nazi Germany, but they gave money and oodles of resources. And, Henry Ford was producing the tanks and the tires, and I.G. Farben was getting money directly funneled to it from Standard Oil of New York. And I was just wondering, how does that happen? Especially considering FDR, we consider him a progressive, one of the biggest progressives. Same with the Rockefellers, maybe Ford not so much. But how does that work? How does that happen? Where on the one side of it, you've got the political spectrum where they're saying war with Germany is inevitable. We don't really like these guys, but we're willing to play the game for a bit. And then on the other side, you've got these businessmen just flagrantly giving money. I mean, even George W. Bush's grandfather was running money to the Nazis and got shut down by the Trading with the Enemy Act. Yeah. So how does that work? How do those two things work together in the same system?
It's funny, as you were talking, I just remembered another Danny thing about this weekend that I promised you my conspiracy theory. I never gave it to you.
Oh, that's right. Right? Yeah, that's right.
We were talking about conspiracy theories, I think, on Friday night, and I said, I got one for you, Danny. And I was supposed to give it at the lecture I just gave, and I didn't. Never got to it. So, and it's kind of connected to what you're talking about. So there are big business in the 1930s that are American that are investing in Germany and opening factories in Germany, including Ford. And so Hitler, for a while, had a little dalliance with Henry Ford about opening a car factory, and one was opened, but it wasn't a significant part of that story. But as I told some of you guys, most business leaders in the 1930s were actually opposed to war. Right. Why? Because business wants trade, they want commerce, they want ships crossing the ocean, and war stops all of that. There were some businesses that wanted the war, like defense contractors, but defense contractors were very small right then. Ford did not become converted to armaments until the war was already declared. So after 41 is when all of the factories in Detroit get converted to making tanks. And that's when I got to stop saying that.
Oh, I know.
The United States starts making all the tanks. So the collusion between business and capitalists that I think you're talking about is mostly happening between big business in the United States and the Roosevelt administration and the federal government. And that's the corporatism that it talk about in Renegade History that is a core part of the New Deal. Again, it's not really challenged by any historian who's serious about this question. And then also, and I didn't mention this in my lectures today, but it's in my Renegade. I did mention this a bit. Almost the exact same relationship is happening in Germany between German big business and the German government, the Nazi Party in particular, leading it. So there's a corporatist model in both countries simultaneously, and that's why the Nazis were so sympathetic. Not sympathetic. They were celebrating Roosevelt and saw in them a brother, in him a brother. And for a while, the New Dealers saw in Hitler and Mussolini brothers too. So that's the kind of collusions going on. I don't know if you're asking, like, how did the U.S. government go to war against a country that's doing business with one of its major capitalists, like Ford? Here's the quick answer to that, which a lot of people know, is that Ford was opposed to the war because he was sympathetic to Nazism and he had some business in Germany. Mm-hmm. So he was one of those business people for not such great reasons who opposed the war, but most did for good reasons.
But it's interesting that you asked, though, the way you jumped into this was through the work of Anthony Sutton.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's a larger conspiracy, as there always is. And if there isn't, you can make one. But in this case, there was a real one. So according to Sutton, and the work that Sutton originally became known for, at the same time this was happening with Germany, it was happening with another country too, which you know.
Correct, right? Soviet Russia.
Right. Mm-hmm. So in the 70s, Sutton started writing these books, right, that were basically like statistical technical books, like the state or Western technology in Soviet development. Sounds like it could have been the title.
Yeah, he was like looking at dockets with tires and stuff, really dry technical shit.
So he's basically just doing technical writing about the the industrial technical relationship between Western business interests and industrial interests in the Soviet Union. The same year that he finishes these two books, he writes a book called National Suicide, which is about money and technology from the United States going to the Soviet Union. So it's actually, if I have my timeline right, it seems like that was his awakening to this kind of international relationship that was going on. And of course, banking is a huge part of this as well. But I think his work about the Nazis was done after, because he has like these books like FDR and Wall Street. The Soviet Union was just how he kind of discovered what was going on, and the work about the business relationship between like the Prescott Bush and like, you know, Union Brown Brothers Harriman, that was all after the discoveries about the Soviets. And he's like, holy shit, this is going on everywhere. It's almost like people are doing battle bots with nations, you know, like or like Rock'em Sock'em robots with nations.
Yeah. So, but Danny, I think you had like a bigger question about the politics of this. Like, what's the political meaning of all this?
Yeah. I mean, how is it that someone like FDR could have a problem, at least presumably, I'm not sure, maybe he didn't have a ideological problem with the Nazis, I don't know. But
oh no.
How could he
certainly not
at least say we want to go to war with these people?
Well, he did, sorry, really quickly, and actually this does sort of partly answer your question. He did have a very big problem with Nazi ideology, and his entire administration did. His foreign policy, the foreign policy wing of it in particular, he had a problem with one part of it, which was the autarky, which I mentioned in the lecture.
Right.
Which was their self-sufficient economic model. They closed off the borders to imports and trade and migration. Mm-hmm. So and I didn't get to this, but the New Deal administration, the Roosevelt administration at that time is, and here's also your closed conspiracy that I find here. I get to do it. The Council on Foreign Relations,
right?
45 East 65th Street was their headquarters, the townhouse in Manhattan at the time. Those are the guys who were sitting at their tables writing plans for how the world will be rearranged after the war. Poland was the best thing that ever happened to them, the German invasion of Poland. They said, this is our time. We can actually rearrange the world the way we want to, the way we've wanted to since World War I, and weren't able to. Now we can do it. They literally sat there in secret at their tables writing the plans for how the world should be rearranged by the United States after the war. 47 East 65th Street, the townhouse that is connected to the CFR's headquarters, was the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt home in Manhattan. They actually literally shared a wall, but they also shared an ideology, and they shared this idea that the United States should rearrange the world's affairs and reorganize its borders as well. And to do so required entering the Great War in Europe, the new Great War in Europe, and make sure that they were the victors so that they could rearrange it. I know. And they said, at the time, we have to keep this secret. We can't let the public know that we are just the 10 or 20 of us dudes in our tweed coats. They were all professors or attached to some university. And by the way, I didn't mention this either. Every single military intervention, every single war in this country's history was thought up by an academic or someone attached or closely affiliated to a university. Every single one of them. The CFR is all academics and Harvard and Columbia people, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly, every single one of them was trained there. And so they said, you know what we need to do? We need a world economy that is, we're going to call it free trade, and we're going to be officially, formally on record as being for free trade always. That's the phrase the United States will always use.
Right, of course.
But they didn't mean that. They meant managed trade. They meant that, well, we're going to have the biggest economy after this thing is over, after the Germans and the Russians kill half of their populations, right? Then we're going to come in 1944 after they've killed each other, and we'll take over. And guess what happened? So in 1944, the very moment when the United States is actually putting its own soldiers on the ground in Europe, these guys have a meeting in Bretton Woods in which they say, oh, we're going to have this thing called the International Monetary Fund,
Yep.
right? And GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. So we're going to run this shit, but we're going to do it because we have the economic superiority and we have all these professors who can manage it. Every trade negotiation we have with any other country, we will be the dominant partner. Right. So sure, it's going to be free trade, but we're going to get what we want in every single trade. So that's going to be our ideology. And also we have to make sure, here's the kicker, here's the thing, Danny. They said what we cannot ever allow in this world is autarky. We can never allow any country with any significant economic base to seal off its borders, to not trade with us,
Right.
to be autonomous, autarkic from us. We can't allow that. In fact, when they ever appear, we have to not just defeat them, we have to annihilate them.
Right.
So that's why when Roosevelt and Churchill announced their Atlantic Charter Alliance against Nazi Germany and Japan, they said, this war will end only with unconditional surrender, which they said meant the annihilation of those regimes, which
Right.
meant the occupation of Germany and Japan, which meant essentially the occupation until those regimes were completely reformed. Those countries were completely reformed around the image that those planners at those desks in that townhouse wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So there's your closed conspiracy that they didn't allow to be public until after the war. And now they're proud of it and say, yeah, we had to keep it secret, but it was good for the world, wasn't it?
Right, but really it's just an economic and cultural monopoly. And it's funny that, at least when I was in school, it was never outright stated, but certainly the impression was given that a monopoly is associated with free market, laissez-faire economics, when, ironically, that's not free market at all. That's the hallmark of totalitarian economics, because it completely destroys any competition. But nonetheless, we're given the image of the monopoly man twiddling his mustache, running away,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly.
It's
So, I mean, all these trade agreements that the
completely
United States has entered into since then are how long? How many pages? Right? Each one is basically a large book.
Right.
Right. Well, free trade would be how long?
A handshake.
A free trade agreement would have how many pages?
Maybe one.
Maybe one with
Yeah.
one sentence on it,
Right.
which would say that trade will be free. Period. Carry on.
Well, Well, that's my time is long
Thanks, Danny.
over, isn't it?
Thank you so much, Danny.
Thank
really
you, guys.
Danny. Who's next? Philip. Phil.
How's it going, guys?
Thanks for coming, Phil, all the way from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Thank
Glad
you
to
for
be
being
here.
such a active, positive participant in the group. By the way, I really appreciate that.
Oh,
The
of
person
course.
I was most looking forward to meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa.
Because you've been saying so many great things.
I've been trying to promote you.
I
yeah.
mean, and I'd never met you before. I was like, who's this Phil Figueroa guy? I couldn't pronounce your name even, but it was pretty amazing what you were saying. And I was really excited to meet you. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course. So I'll get right into it. I have a few questions, but first I'm thinking about what you lectured on today. Basically, how, and it's not a new argument, but I think the way you're presenting it will be devastating to many people. That World War II was, what, in Pat Buchanan's words, an unnecessary war, but you go even further than that. How do you? I worry that your book this coming book will be ignored, or I don't know, more than the first book or the Renegade History, just because of the potential repercussions of people hearing that argument and how it will just destroy their world.
Yeah. I don't know.
Because you have the whole mythology around the Greatest Generation, and so many people have relatives that were veterans or
Yeah.
You
And
also
it's-
have
or-
a lot the
Or
you
who
know,
died in Germany.
yeah, exactly.
There's that very, very touchy subject of the Jews as well. I mean, that might
Yeah,
be
of
the
course,
biggest
of course. Yeah.
part of it today. Yeah.
Yeah. How am I going to deal with that? When I'm called a Nazi sympathizer and an anti-Semite and an apologist for the worst regime in world history? I don't know. Well, no, actually, I think it's a matter of framing, and that's what I have to work
Yeah.
on now. How do I present this stuff? And so I think what's important is to put forward first, and this is the central part of the argument, was that the German people were pretty much making sure that that regime was unsustainable from the get-go, and that there was resistance of all kinds among all sorts of groups of people. And I didn't even talk about the youth with you guys, the Hitler youth. Talk about unschooling. So what happens is the Nazis, I didn't mention this to you guys, what happens is the Nazis, first they imprison all the communists, which is tens of thousands of people, German people and socialists. Then they imprison all the people who are too lazy to work in the armaments factories. That's more tens of thousands of adults, Germans. Then they conscript every man in Germany into the Wehrmacht, into the army or the navy or the air force. That was 95% of the German military was conscripts, slaves. And many of the women were conscripted to work in the factories, building bombs and tanks, etc. Well, so that's slavery right there. That's bad enough. We all know about that. Fine. But here's the unintended consequence of that no one ever thinks about, at least not in this country. What happened to the kids? They were all suddenly unparented and unschooled because there weren't enough teachers either. There weren't parents and there weren't teachers. So what happened? So-called juvenile crime tripled in 3 years in the late 1930s inside Germany. There were gangs of youth who were taking over the streets of many of the major cities in Germany. The Leipzig Muten, the mob they were called, they were all teenagers, were notorious for not only refusing to work or go to school, but for fighting the Hitler Youth in the streets. The Edelweiss Pirates were the kids all around Cologne, I told you guys about, in the Ruhr area where all the armaments factories were. These were all unparented kids because all their parents were either working in those factories in around Cologne or they were on the front in Poland. The hills around Cologne are really beautiful, and those kids would just go play in the hills, and they would like to imitate. Their favorite thing to do was to imitate the cowboys and Indians. No, sorry, I take that back. They liked to imitate the Indians. The Indians and the pirates in the dime novels and the Hollywood movies that all the German youth loved at the time. And they would say, we're fighting, they would pretend that they were the Indians fighting against the cowboys, the Indians who escaped capture by the lawmen, the cowboy lawmen and the soldiers after the Civil War. And they loved the pirates because they were free. And so in 1939, when the war starts, the number of the so-called Cologne, they were called the Cologne Navajo, they called themselves the Navajo, and Edelweiss pirates, because their insignia was the Edelweiss flower that they all wore. Their numbers tripled and quadrupled and quintupled. It got so big, the youth movement away from the regime into the hills and into the streets, it became so big that the Gestapo devoted an entire section of its intelligence gathering operations to this problem. So there were Gestapo agents and Hitler Youth officers all over Germany trying to find out where these kids were. And they were simply walking the streets or wandering the hills, playing guitars and singing songs. But then sometimes when these Hitler Youth and Gestapo agents would come across them, they would fight them. They would fight them. And there are reports that we discovered in the 1990s of the Gestapo saying, every time our people, our officers, our agents go someplace, they get bricks thrown at them or rocks thrown at them, or they get hit with bats in the streets by these criminal youth gangs. It was a massive movement away from that regime from below by the kids. That's just a start.
Yeah, you never hear about this. You have the idea that it's this homogenous, unthinking population that just supports everything. That's just the regime is doing, and that's just a start of the resistance. And it was mostly passive, though. There was almost no organized resistance. That's part of the reason that it's been ignored. Is there was no Martin Luther King of Nazi Germany. There was no organization. They crushed all the organizations the Nazis did first. But there was all sorts of what we call passive resistance or tacit resistance almost every hour of every day in every city all over the place. And I told you guys about the strikes in the factories and the armaments factories in particular. And the Gestapo was panicked about this. And they were trying to figure out a way to motivate the workers to work. And here was the problem. They had conscripted all of so many workers and sent them to the front that there was a surplus of jobs, that there was this extremely tight labor market. So the workers had all this power. They could basically demand whatever they wanted to. And so if you look, wages are going up, up, up during the war. When the Nazi government needs people to sacrifice themselves, workers are demanding and getting higher wages, and then hours are shortening too. When they need these people to be completely good, disciplined Aryans, they're doing just the opposite. And then all the Hamburg swings, the jazz kids, I didn't tell you about either. There's kids in all the cities, especially Hamburg and Berlin, who are really into jazz, and they're completely uninterested in being Nazis. And the Gestapo have a whole division devoted to going from house to house, where they would have these house parties where they would play Louis Armstrong and dance to shut them down and throw those kids in jail. They had camps full of youth who were either Edelweiss pirates or Hamburg swings or swing kids. They had jails full of their parents who refused to work or work hard enough. They executed 10,000 people who deserted from the Wehrmacht, 20,000 people who deserted from the Wehrmacht. And that represents probably 1/10 of those who actually did desert. And then, as you know, I mean, there's a whole, so that's the German people, right? And here's something that everybody should go read right away. If you don't believe me about what Jews thought about all this, and about what the United States should do, Jews inside Germany. There was a guy named Victor Klemperer, who was a German Jew who lived in Berlin all through this period, all through the 1930s and all through the war. And he wrote a diary every single day of what was going on in Berlin. And he said consistently, what we are most afraid of is a war. What we are most afraid of is the United States or Britain entering this war. He said, when that happens, we all have to go underground, because that is when we get lined up against a wall and shot. The Jews in Vienna in 1941, after they had been occupied and they were being forced to deport by the Nazis who had occupied Austria, they publicly stated that they were afraid. To the New York, this is in the New York Times, which was pro-FDR, pro-intervention. They stated to the New York Times, to the Western media, the worst thing that could happen to us is for the United States to enter this war. Because that is when we will no longer be useful as hostages. That's how the Nazis considered the Jews.
We will hold these people and tell the West, which Hitler said over and over again, that we...
Yeah, you were saying in 1939, his speech at
he
the
said
Reichstag.
it over and over again for years and years. The most famous speech in which he says this is the Reichstag prophecy speech of 1939 in January, in which he says, we will hold these people. If you intervene militarily against us, world Jewry, he said, will pay. It was a threat. Most historians in Europe, and especially in Germany now, interpret that speech as the hostage speech, that he was saying, if you intervene, we will kill them. So the intervention of the U.S., I say, and other historians in Europe are saying, but not quite yet in America, are saying, the intervention of the United States guaranteed the Holocaust. Didn't cause it, but it guaranteed it. And all they had to do was let the German people themselves resist and let that Nazi regime, the logic of it, implode, which it was doing anyway. So that's how I would, I guess, when I'm on Terry Gross, I guess that's what I would say.
Any follow-ups? You got plenty of time.
You were talking about the isolationists. When your research, what percentage of the population or Congress were isolationists leading up, like the 39, 40? I'm trying to remember from what, from my history classes. I know it was at least a significant minority.
Yeah,
right?
A significant minority, a very powerful minority centered in the Midwestern states. A lot of Midwesterners were isolationists, so-called isolationists. They were really just anti-war, and they were called isolationists, even though most of them were pro-trade. It's a complete smear, and it's inaccurate. They were very significant, and they made many of the arguments that I'm making now. They knew what was going on. They could see it, and they were saying this. You could look it up. I mean, the way I'm talking now is the way a lot of those senators then were talking then. They didn't have the full picture, but they were anti-intervention, and they believed it would cause something much worse for the people in Germany as well as for Americans. The real tragedy, and I won't even say it's tragedy, because I just think it was straight up cowardice, because they were senators and they had nothing. They were basically invulnerable. As soon as war was declared, they were making these phenomenal arguments and being very aggressive about it until Pearl Harbor. And the day after that, they folded their tents and went home. And there hasn't been a so-called isolationist or anti-war movement, at least in the political class, since then. So, I'm glad they did what they did. But if they had continued to speak, maybe we would actually know something about this stuff. Yeah.
Will this book be the straw that broke the myth of FDR's, the back of that myth? Think will this do it? Can we make this happen?
I keep putting straws on that dude's back, and I keep waiting for it to break. So you mentioned my first book, or The Renegade. It's actually my second book.
Yeah.
Being ignored, and it's exactly half right, which is that it has not received a single academic review, and has not received a single review by the so-called mainstream press, although that is almost no longer, it's almost a meaningless term nowadays. But, I have a lot, that book has a lot of fans. I can tell you the numbers if you want, but it's been probably the actual official numbers represent a small, it's pretty remarkable. It's just been entirely 100% grassroots. It's kind of like unschooling, kind of like homeschooling, kind of like everything we're doing, kind of like podcasting, kind of like all this stuff, man. It's just amazing. What a moment. It's revolutionary. You couldn't have a book like that would do well at all before. So that's probably going to happen now. I think that's what they will do to it. They'll ignore it, meaning the mainstream, the establishment, the institutions. And we'll see. I don't know. It's about, again, we'll see if it catches on. I have a feeling it will. I have a feeling this is going to find an audience. Well, thank God it already has an audience in a sense. But, I do actually, this is very important though. I hope it's I want everyone to read it, but there's a certain audience I don't want, of course, and I'm going to make goddamn sure they don't think it's their book, which is alt-right racists, right? Or anti-Semites. They're going to find out on the first page that this is not the book for them. Because it's completely, thoroughly anti-Semitic, my argument, right, from the get-go. And that's going to be clear.
What do you think about releasing the book with maybe a series of promo videos that take the arguments, encapsulate them into a 5 to 10 minute 5 to 10 minute presentations, and just to help it catch on. I think
I
think that would be a good idea.
I think that's the best idea. And I told you earlier that that's what I want to do now. Like after I write this book, I would love to do cultural work on this because I think we have to change the dominant narrative of World War II. Or else we're going to have a World War III that might be even worse because they're going to continue to use that narrative to push us into wars. And it's completely unquestioned, at least in this country. It's starting to happen in Europe. So what I want to do, I want to do stuff like make videos and movies and TV shows and graphic novels and whatever it takes, you know. So I think videos, even documentary style, even just me talking is a great idea. You want to help?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
definitely.
Let's do it. No, it's a fantastic idea. Yeah. Well, let's talk later.
Cool.
Do you think you could get attacked by Antifa? Or whatever the...
I hope so.
Yeah. Well,
I've been wanting a fight for a long time.
But it also pushes maybe some of those
a real fight
people that you don't want into your corner. But it's certainly positive attention from a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So something to work on.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Phil.
Thank
you so much. Kevin, are you ready? Sure. All right. Kevin Geary.
Is there a reason you just sent people for sandwiches right before my turn? Do you want a sandwich? No, I'm good.
So, worth mentioning, Kevin came all the way from Georgia, which was awesome.
Also phenomenal.
On a plane, I mean, it didn't take that much work, but...
Right.
Took work for somebody. Pilots.
So, what's on your mind, Kevin?
I don't know. Did you have something you want to talk about that?
Yeah, man. I want to help with my. I want you to help me with my diet.
Okay.
But
we can do that.
I don't know. So you want to hear the truth?
Sure.
So you were the person I was afraid of the most.
Okay.
I wasn't sure. What was it? Like you told me that he was going to be upset, or he was not upset with me, but that he had some issues with like the truth stuff and the postmodern stuff and all that stuff.
Right.
And, well,
I said I mean, we've had conversations about this, and I said I'm excited for Kevin to be there and to see what happens.
Yeah,
but that's not to put anything on Kevin. Like now he has to perform. So, but you were nervous.
I mean, in a good way.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, I thought there'd be an interesting conflict. I've been watching your face a lot this weekend and I've been waiting for something to come from you. And not much has, except, however, last night, in fact, you really said something that totally helped me reframe this thing again, which is that you said, what you should say is that what I want is for people to think that, to be 99% sure that things are true or real, but just hold out the 1%. Of skepticism, right? Isn't that what you said? Like, and that's the way to present this. And
that's what I came. That was the only thing I could think of to talk to you about up here.
Oh yeah,
getting this opportunity.
Cool.
And we talked about it before you came in today, and I was pretty vocal about it, but wasn't sure about what I was trying to, because when I heard you, okay, so the first time I heard you talk about relativism was with Wes and Brett on School Sucks. Yep. And I was angry after listening to that podcast, right? And I thought about it.
And a lot of other people. Yeah.
I thought about it for a long time, and I was trying to fit myself into like your shoes and your position, and I couldn't do it for the longest time until I came here, and then I heard you talk about it more.
Cool.
And you said a few things. I don't know if I'll be able to remember them off the top of my head, but I started to like really understand where you were coming from. And then I thought back to the past conversations and I thought about the wall thing. And I started to realize that there's a really good point that you're making. And I think is your whole entire position that
now I'm going to cry again because that's the best thing I've heard all weekend.
that I agree with. And then there's weeds that everybody gets tangled up in. Yeah. That perhaps they don't need to get tangled up in.
No, I thought you nailed it. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
When you said that to me, because when you said it, I thought, wait, what are you trying to say? And when I realized you were saying, this is how you should say this, I said, oh, absolutely. Now I get it. That's what I'm going to do from now on, as a matter of fact, I think. Yeah, I love that.
Right. So you agree.
So I operate in the world that way, which is
Of
that obvious,
yeah,
as I said
right.
to you guys, I don't get into a plane and worry that it's not actually a plane and going to actually take me to another city. It's just that I just hold out 1% of me that says, well, there's another way to interpret this experience in this moment, this thing that we call flying in a plane, right?
Right.
That's all. And that's it. So if
That is
that's
it.
good for you, that's great for me, because I think that is it's gonna get this it is really an important idea to me over to other people. So yeah.
And I think the most important part of it was when you said you can have the benefits of objectivity without being an objectivist.
There you go. Exactly. That's it. Right. I live my life mostly as what you would call, I guess, an objectivist, right? You would never know from the way I behave and the decisions I make in life that I'm a relativist, of course. Right?
Words you use, some certain words, facts.
Yeah, right. In fact, I used the word truth about 5 times already just in this podcast. Sure. Yeah. So, sure. Yeah, no, man, that was big. That was big for me. Yeah.
So I think the way that we got into it today, and Kevin and I have had this conversation, maybe we might have had it as a group a couple of months ago about the Rogan appearance when it went into race and gender, and this was like the idea of getting caught in the weeds, right? So you have like there are these jumps. This is another thing that we talked about this morning, where like let's just take race science, where people went out and they used their senses to make observations about things in their physical world, and they cataloged those observations, and then some shit happened, and then some shit happened, and then they made conclusions that were more behavioral, emotional about those people. There's stuff in between, we're not always sure what it is, and then some stuff happened, and some stuff happened, and they had prescriptions. And the prescriptions seem to be the thing that you were arguing against most adamantly on the Joe Rogan.
Well, no, I was arguing against all of it.
But
when it has to do with race.
But you have said that the thing that it's what conclusions people have in their own minds is irrelevant, and it doesn't. It's the actions or the prescriptions that follow, especially the ones that are imposed.
Oh, I mean, sure. If you stop at there are different groups of people with different characteristics. Period. I suppose that might have no ill effects on the world, but that's never where it stops. In fact, that it always starts with the attempt, as I said on Rogan, it starts with the attempt to manipulate, coerce, invade, conquer, enslave people. That's how race was invented and is reinvented.
Well, that's race science is
even
confirmation
now,
bias.
By
it's
the way,
working backwards from a conclusion.
Even now in its liberal guise.
Yeah.
In affirmative action, that's just one massive manipulation. No, it's not enslaving or killing or conquering people, but it's certainly manipulating people in all sorts of ways. And affirmative action simply reifies, makes real again this idea that was invented by the goddamn slave owners. So to justify slavery. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but
so it sounds like the concern that you're expressing is that everything that is done in the way of like race and now taking place with gender is confirmation bias, where people have started with a conclusion, right? We want white supremacy, we want patriarchy, whatever. And then they say, okay, well, now we have to do the science between where we are and where we want to be.
Okay.
And we'll fill in whatever needs to be there.
I think I know what you're getting at here, which is what's now called, I guess, the race realist claim about IQ. And I mean, maybe not specifically, but it's part of this, right? So, okay, you identify this thing called IQ. There's this thing that they identify as, what's it called? There's the letter, which is it? It's the letter that
Q?
G factor, right? That is intelligence. And here it is. People of certain races have a higher IQ, biologically than people of other races. Right? That's what you're getting at.
That's not what I'm getting at.
I know. Well,
that's not an argument that I'm making.
Oh, well, let me do that though.
No, but
let me pretend that is the argument you made for a second.
Even because that is data to suggest that's not something that I think is really significant.
No.
There's so many variables that are neglected.
I know, but wait, hold on. Okay. So let me do this. It's important though. So the data itself is problematic. So just to begin with,
I don't know enough about how the data was collected.
You can dismantle this thing or pull it apart in so many ways. So, for instance, G factor, this thing, this intelligence thing. What kind of intelligence is that? Is it the ability to do math? Mostly, it turns out that's what they're measuring.
It's mostly logical problem solving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is that the only kind of intelligence?
Not even close.
How many kinds of intelligence are there, right? You see where this goes? It's just infinite. And I mean that word really deliberately. It's infinite. How many ways you can interpret all this stuff, right? It's about drawing, it's that people intervene and draw lines at particular moments, particular places, and say, oh, that's where the black people start.
Okay, well, I think
and the white people end, right? Hold on. So, and then they say, okay, so this group of people over here in this part of the world, they have a higher number, intelligence or G factor, whatever it is, than these people in this part of the world. Okay. Then they say, oh, well, so black people or white people, they have this different number than the other group. Well, okay, so black, what does that mean? Right? So if you look at, I'll even take your data, I'll even take your measurement system. The IQ of people as we speak now, in Nigeria, average IQ is higher than the IQ of people who live in Ethiopia. And their IQ is higher or lower, it's different, whatever, than people who live in Somalia, who live in Congo. They're all different. And by the way, have you seen people who are from the Congo and what they look like? And people who are from Ethiopia and Somalia and what they look like? Why are they all the same race? They look so different. It's ridiculous, but they're black for some reason, and they're all. I know that you're not saying this. I'm just deconstructing this very important argument that's everywhere now, that even really smart people like Sam Harris are spreading around, and Charles Murray. This is their argument. This is them, not you. I don't know if you believe this, but this is what they're saying. I'm responding to that argument. So that all those lines they're drawing, the black line, right? It's all around everybody who came from Africa. Oh, when? Because we all come from Africa. But even if you just do it around the line around the people who come from Africa now, those people look so different. They have different IQs. They have different everything. How are they the same race? You understand, right? This is just this arbitrary thing, this choice that's made to draw divisions. And in Europe, right? There were 3 races apparently 100 years ago, right? The Jews were a race, the Irish were a race, the Italians were a race, the Alpines, the Mediterraneans, the Nordics, blah, blah, blah. And now we all look at it, it's all just white. Mm-hmm. You know who was invented in World War II? I didn't mention this. I meant to get into this. Ruth Benedict was this anthropologist who was Margaret Mead's partner. She was the one who went to the islands in the Pacific and studied the natives and said, oh, there's cultural relativism, meaning there's no way we can objectively measure or quantify or qualify these different cultures. She changed her mind during World War II. She said, oh, the Nazis are so terrible that we actually need to impose our ideas about race on the world. Here's the thing she did, though. She didn't get rid of the idea of race. And you know what she actually did? She and other anthropologists, but she was the leader. She invented these people called Caucasians. The category of Caucasian was invented by Ruth Benedict and Columbia University anthropologists at that time. And since then, we've had this idea. It is actually on census forms, as you know, and all the affirmative action forms and everywhere in our culture. You're either Black, and now it's African American, I suppose, or Caucasian. That was a complete invention, fiction. It makes no sense whatsoever. The Caucasus Mountains are in Russia. Mm-hmm. What does that have to do with someone from Ireland, with someone from Australia, with someone from... It makes no sense whatsoever, but we just talk about it as if it's a biological, eternal fact.
Yeah, I feel like I derailed us into the weeds, but I'm now thinking I don't know if there's a way that this doesn't go into the weeds.
There is. There absolutely is.
So back to you. I'm sorry. Go
ahead.
There
is. So the bottom line point you're trying to make is about truth claims. Mm-hmm. The destructiveness of truth claims.
Yes.
The potential destructiveness of truth claims.
Yeah. I think, so at worst, they're destructive, like super destructive, right? And that we all probably agree on that, right? Like the Nazis, what they did. At best, they're conversation stoppers. They're anti-intellectual. Right. They're anti-science. That's the funniest thing. That's the thing I came upon recently from someone else.
Anti-progress.
Turned me on to that. Anti-science.
Right.
I mean, yeah, right. And meaning, oh, that's settled. That's true. We know that this is this. So there's no reason to study it any further or ask questions about it. I think that is destructive anyway, right?
Right.
That's another form of destruction. That's a pretty bad one. Yeah. So we should avoid it. That's all.
Right. So there's two.
Mhm.
There's the stopping of science, of investigation, and then there's the prescriptions that
Follow.
become, exactly, become very destructive to people, real people.
Yeah.
So my point was the best way to get that across in a way that people understand that is not talking about the hardness of walls and the characteristics of dicks, right? Because that's the fucking weeds that everybody gets lost in.
Uh-huh.
Whereas there were examples that people can attach themselves to, such as your gravity argument that you made, such as the shape of the earth argument that you made, right? Those are like real things that people are like, oh, okay, I see. Those actually mattered. Like when people were wrong about those, there were real issues at hand.
Yeah, I think it was Mike Mogren, I think, said at one point, he said when I was doing this, why does that matter? Even if you're right, I think is what he was suggesting. Like, why does it matter?
Right.
Yeah. Well, sorry, but I think it does, because all the bad truth claims are you're allowing people to make truth claims. If you allow them to make any, you're allowing them to make further truth claims. I think. Yeah. So it has to extend to everything. So
it does, but
okay, good.
but it starts with
the
important ones.
Oh,
if they want to keep pushing and pressing.
But that's what always happens, though. So I started on Rogan, right, by talking about gender and race and the bad stuff, right, and then it ends up. Actually, we didn't even go there on Rogan, but normally, and this is what's been happening with my students for 20 years, is that I do this with them, and I start with the easy stuff like morality and culture and race and gender, and then they say, "Well, what about the wall, Thad?" And then I have to do the wall thing. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it tall? Is it small? Is it right? I don't know, because I feel like I know people have told me what you just told me, and I get it, because I understand that that's the hardest thing for people to get. But you have to allow for skepticism in everything,
right?
And that's kind of what you were telling me. I thought, right?
Yeah.
The 1%. If you'll give me 1%, I'll take it.
Yeah.
And that's all I ask for. Just don't be 100. Because if you stop asking, if you say that this is settled, this is true, then again, it's there's nothing more to talk about, no more questions to ask.
Yeah, and I think the way that I would do it is rather than bringing them with me into the characteristics of the wall, when they ask about the wall, they bring up the wall, just go back to a previous example of the earth. So you're going to tell me about this wall, what people used to tell me about the shape of the earth?
You think that would go over well?
No, because that's really what the bottom line is, right? Like people thought about the earth the same way they could possibly be thinking about the wall. That's it. That's it.
It was about arrogance, right?
Yeah, it's just being...
It's about arrogance.
You said humility. That's all. That's the word.
Great. Yes, that's exactly right. I don't know if I actually used that word, but you did, and that is what I am talking about, is there was an arrogance, right? Of course, when people said, oh, the earth is flat. And then there was a new arrogance when they said it's a perfect sphere. And now that they think it's oblong and bumpy, well, and we're sure that that's always going to be true, isn't that arrogance? Can't we call it that? And can't we just say, hey, maybe there's a 1% chance that it's something else, right?
Right.
So yeah, is that good? Humility,
and,
great word.
And your appeal to being agnostic.
Yeah, that was.
There's the two things right there.
I won't give you credit for that one. That was someone else here this weekend, but that was the other thing I learned from you guys.
That
was important.
What I wanted to get to when I said impactful moment. Can you just tell that story really quickly? Because that actually, like, if that dude had just been sitting there 2 years ago when we were having that conversation, that people, I think people perceived a lot of arrogance on your side,
sure,
and maybe some on our side if they were in your camp at the time,
sure.
But just tell that story really quickly, because I thought that was really important.
I don't know if I don't think this was in the content of what I said, but I could certainly imagine my style being interpreted as basically the atheist style, meaning right, which is just a big fat truth claim. And I am not an atheist in religion, and I'm also trying to say, and well, you guys, it was Patrick who said to me over this weekend, said, you know what you're doing, what you should do is present yourself as an agnostic on these questions, and he's completely correct. Not only is that the best way to frame it, that's actually what I believe. And I think that's where maybe I've failed in this, is that I haven't presented myself as an agnostic, which is actually what my ideas are on this, which is that I don't know if there's a truth out there. I simply, just like God, have never seen good evidence of it, that there's some eternal truth anywhere, just like with God. I don't say or I shouldn't say, that there is no truth. That's an absolute truth claim.
Mm-hmm.
And I shouldn't say there is no God. That's an absolute truth claim as well. That's also arrogant. And so you guys, man, that was big. It will be big. But yeah, and then you added on last night with the 99.1%. That's a great way to frame it.
Yeah.
God, why didn't you guys talk to me like a few months ago? Like you would have saved me like thousands of people on Twitter calling me an idiot. My God. No, it's great. No, I'm glad it all happened, including the Rogan thing and all of that. You know, it's called learning. It's this weird thing that happens when you have painful moments.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, fucking solved, huh?
Yeah, man.
I mean, right? Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, man.
Of course, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else want this mic? Awesome.
Yes. We like that.
Nelson.
I was expecting a Filipino guy to walk in, but no.
I'm too tall, maybe a little
And I was like, well, maybe he's got some Filipino in him. Here I am being a race realist. Jesus Christ. Okay.
maybe Filipino, you don't even know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, yeah, right, exactly. That's right. Where do you draw the line anyway? And those Filipinos, you know about them now. So
Troublemakers, all of them.
hit me, man. What do you got?
Well, where'd you come from first?
So I'm from the Midwest, but that's actually a bold-faced lie. I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from Dominican Republic. That's where my family's from. But we were transplants into Michigan.
Oh,
so
that's the Spanish name. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, got it now. Yep.
It's Spanish.
Aquino is a Spanish name
That's
is
right.
common in the Philippines. That's why I was expecting a Filipino. But anyway, I got a Dominican instead.
Dominican instead, and
Gotcha.
that's still a Spanish
Yep.
conquered area, right? So,
Yep, indeed.
So my question is, I've kind of made that question up, but a lot of the conversations that we've had over the weekend are really kind of explosive for people that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've noticed.
I was going to say people that look like me, but that's really not a fair thing to say.
Oh, look like you. Oh, okay, yeah.
It's just an explosive conversation to have
yeah.
to even talk
Sure.
about race and what people have thought about race and things like that.
Just say anything.
Anything about race, right?
Right. See what's happening. It's exploding already. You're right. These days, I'd say it is to say anything. Even just in the last 10 years, I've noticed in my classrooms that I've started to censor myself more. Not a lot, but just it's felt like it's closing in a bit. You know, the allowable discourse, even in my own classrooms that I mostly control, I have felt that it's more dangerous to say stuff, to say anything. You know, so like I have to spend like an hour framing something before I can actually say the thing. But keep going. You were about to say something else, right?
Well, because that's exactly, you're driving exactly where I was going is. I think it's a real shame. You lose a really, really important element of the conversation. For people need to understand these things, and they completely dismiss anything about these conversations. So I was starting to ask you how you get at these conversations without having that explosiveness happen around you.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's all about framing, and it's all about. I think what happens is so. You know, if you know my argument about slavery, I don't know if you've read it, but you know, it's as dangerous as it gets. But the thing is, I'm not ashamed of it one bit because, and in a way, I'm not really afraid of it because the whole thing is not only anti-racist. If anything, its fault is that it places African Americans in their culture in a superior position to whites. I mean, the criticism I get about it that actually makes sense to me is that I actually just sort of flip. It's not racism, but like sort of racial discrimination. But I'm just sort of like pro-black more than than white.
Reverse.
It's not. Well, it's different. I mean, no. The argument is simply that I prefer, and much of the world, like all the people around the world who loved African American culture over the last 100 years, have preferred African American culture to white culture. That's all. Meaning, and when I say white culture, I know I got to unpack that too, and that's that you can't leave that unpacked. What I mean by that is just formal, traditional, Puritan and Victorian elite culture in the United States that was taught in the schools and proclaimed by government officials, right? And business leaders, meaning the stuff that's like acceptable in what I call formal culture, the people with the suits who represent institutions and represent the nation and represent the state, et cetera. That the stuff that they say to us, that's what teachers say.
Right.
So, so that to me, it's all derived. And what I do in the book is I show that's like what presidents now, except for Trump, well, that's his difference. But presidents until Trump, the way they talked and what they said and how they behaved and comported themselves, the lineage of that culture, which is a really weird culture, because do you know any Americans who actually behave like those politicians do, right? You can trace it right back to Plymouth Rock and the Puritans and this whole idea about the body being bad and sex being bad and work being good and discipline being godly, and that we should restrain ourselves and our animal passions and we should live orderly lives, meaning we should just be industrious and not enjoy life and shun pleasure because that's the devil's thing. The Puritan roots of that. So whites then in the 19th century said that stuff, the discipline, the hardness, the meanness, the repression, that's what white people do. The thing is, they thought it was good, right? It's all about valuation. They said, that's what white people do, and that's the good stuff. Amazing, right? And what black people do, and others, but mostly black people in this country, they do all the stuff that's of the body. Like they dance and they have sex with people who aren't their wives. And they make music that sounds like the devil's music, et cetera, right? And that's the bad stuff. And you shouldn't do that. So to me, that's my whole theory or really history of American racism, which is different than almost everyone else's. That's how I go at it, is that's my explanation for it. So what I say to people now is, like, I've had lots of black students over the years, and I give this to them. When I give it to them like that, like I just gave to you, it's cool. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, but if I say, yeah, black people are really good at dancing, but that's cool, it's not going to go over so well. So, I make it really clear which side I'm on. That's the thing. With World War II and the Nazis, same thing. I make it really clear at the outset which side I'm on. Right away, and I stay there. I make it clear. Everything that comes out of my mouth, I make sure is very clearly on that side of a fight. And even stuff that if you take it out of context, if you isolate it, would look like I'm the fucking grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. But when I keep it there and I keep it within the logic, within the structure, right, and I keep showing that no, saying that sex is not bad. And that African Americans, generally speaking, simply had less or different shame about sex, including slaves, than whites did. That was just generally more liberated. I mean, there's all sorts of variation, of course, but generally speaking, that's anti-racist. It's saying, because I'm saying that stuff is good. That's what's so bizarre about Americans. They flip their minds upside down to be not racist. And what they end up doing is endorsing all these things like the nuclear family, which I'm sorry is ridiculous, and a prison. And I used to belong to one, and I still kind of do. But it's absurd, and that's an invention. It just is a fact of Northern Europeans, people we call white, as their idea. And they were the ones who said, this is what you should do. When you're 18 years old, you should marry someone and stay with them for the rest of your lives. And repress yourself to make that happen. And you should have many children and devote your lives to raising those children and working. So what's happened subsequently is that all these minority groups, it's not just black people, it's all kinds, right? Gays, women, all sorts, immigrants of all sorts, have come along and they've been like, what the fuck is this weird shit that these people in America, it's also just American. It's not anywhere else in the world. Like the nuclear family is just a weird idea in most of the world. The Puritan work ethic doesn't exist. No one else in the world has ever heard of that until they get here. They come here and they're like, what is that? We're not interested. We want a big extended family because being a parent is backbreaking. So we need everybody on board to raise these children. We need grandpa and grandma and aunts and uncles and cousins and neighbors and whoever the hell will help us so immigrants, right? I just described like every immigrant group to this country. That's how they came here, with extended families. And that's what they were criticized for. oh my God, these dirty Slovenians with their huge families filling up our neighborhoods. We can't have that. We don't do that.
But is the huge family just a cover for, like, because lots of us had I had a nuclear family, and my parents, when I was born, they moved to Pennsylvania for my dad's work, and the whole family was up right in this area. As soon as my mom was pregnant again with my brother, they said the first thing we're doing, nuclear family, all very traditional. They moved right back to here because they said, now, we need help, we need support. So that, it's
Right.
pretty, just because people, have this white Anglo origin, or they have, they weren't part of one of those waves of immigrations, they behave that way too. So it just sounds like a cover for xenophobia to say, oh, there's too many of them. They got this, aunt.
Well, the hypocrisy
Okay, sure. Okay,
of white people, whatever, over centuries on this proves my point.
Right.
Because they can't follow their own rules. How many people of any color, I don't care, have really been that person forever, right? Have devoted themselves 100% to raising a family and being workers? None. Even the goddamn Mathers down the road, the increase in cotton and those dudes from all the Puritans were always talking about the problem they had with people drinking whiskey and running off into the woods and having sex with Indians and then a bunch of them. And Chris was talking to me about this, it's in my book in Renegade, Marymount, which is, you guys know about this? Some of you guys know about this. This whole band of Puritan pilgrims. Well, they came with the pilgrims. They weren't really Puritans, but they were like, fuck this shit. This is no fun at all. What we're going to do is we're going to leave Plymouth and go down the road a ways. It's now Quincy, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. And they established their own colony called Marymount. And Thomas Morton was their leader. And what they did was they erected this maypole, which was a thing among poor people in England. It was you partied around it, you danced around it, either seasonally or every day or whatever, however often you wanted to. It was a symbol of pleasure, sensual pleasure, and dancing was how they expressed it. This is white people. This is English people, right?
I like it.
Me too, right? Imagine that, white people dancing and actually thinking it's a good thing too. and then there was lots of drinking, of course, but that was everybody. And the worst of all, they invited the Indians in to the town to party with them, and so. So that's why the very first militia, the really first the first American military was formed to destroy Marymount. Miles Standish, who's a big hero in all the American textbooks, was the leader of the Puritans militia, the Plymouth militia, and they marched on Marymount and they chopped down that maypole and they threw Morton in a prison and they kicked all the Indians out and they destroyed it and it was over. So that was the beginning, I say in my book, of America's longest cultural civil war. But it also proves that, first of all, none of this is biological. White people and all this whiteness stuff ain't nothing biological about any of it. You can go any way you want. It's all a choice. And also that it's just damn near impossible to follow all these rules that these Puritans established a long time ago. But most importantly, why should we? We should work to get stuff we want. Period. Just a means to an end. That's how slaves thought of work. Obviously, because they didn't get anything for it. So they just thought, I work just to stop from being whipped or whatever. And that's the culture you see following among many African Americans. The Caribbean thing, by the way, is an entirely different story. And that's a very interesting, complex thing that complicates this. But anyway, and so the dominant view of work in the rest of the world and among slaves and their descendants, that work is just a means to an end. If you need something if you want something that requires work, then you got to do the work. There's nothing else we can do about it. The Puritan work ethic is totally different. It is that work, no matter what you get for it, is good, virtuous, and godly. So you should always work.
So are you saying this is purely American? And I guess that's my follow-up question.
Yep.
When you are doing your research and you're looking outside of the United States, for me, I do some work outside of the United States, and I find that these conversations about race and about just being able to talk openly about who people are is not as, I'm going to use my word, explosive as I find when I come back home.
Oh, yeah.
How did you find when you were doing your research abroad, and how did you find that you could get into these topics without people overreacting?
I didn't do any research abroad, first of all. For the new book, You don't need to. It's all here. I mean, the records are all available. I mean, I found out the exact number of phonographs sold in Cairo in 1912. Because you can now do that stuff. There's stuff, it's just there. You just have to look for it. No, here's the thing. You just have to have the right questions. Right? It's all it takes, and you'll find it. It's so much available now. But anyway, in terms of race and the politics of discussing race, I don't know. It's reached a pitch now. It's always been tough, but man, do you want to hear why I think it's reached a pitch?
Yeah, because I do. It's just, I find it's completely illogical. We can't talk about it as a topic. So just last night I was experimenting, just touching this topic that I heard you talk about yesterday, just with a friend of mine, and he and I, we've known each other for almost 20 years, and just bringing these things up was like, whoa, what do you mean? What?
So I can't tell you how many times people have told me just that. I've had black people tell me this, white people tell me this, purple people telling me this. I told my friend that thing you said, and he started yelling at me.
Those purple people especially.
I know. It's all from the campuses. This comes back to school sucks. It really does. And this whole bigger project of school sucks. So here's what happened. I did do the history of the higher education monopoly. I didn't finish that. Let me finish it. Thank you for asking this, because let me finish what happens with that. So there's basically a monopoly established for higher education. So this school that we're sitting in right now, Endicott College, it's accredited by a regional accreditation agency, which is licensed by the federal government, namely the Department of Education, the Secretary of Education, meaning you can't really have a college in this country that gives credit without getting the approval of the federal government, the executive branch of the federal government. Monopoly, state protected monopoly. I can't give credits for Renegade University because of that, because they demand a physical plant, a campus, a dormitory, a library, a gym, a faculty, right? I found that out. I was like, oh, okay, I get how this has been working all these years. It's amazing. I was a goddamn faculty member in all these schools. I never even knew this until I tried to start my own school. Then they told me. Okay, so that's number one. Tenure, lifetime appointments, creates an insular culture because you just hire the people who agree with you, and you're there forever. Faculty, right? So they're there forever. These people, they teach in these places for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they hire people who think like them. So it becomes an echo chamber. That's number two, very unhealthy. Number three is that then they added on top of all that in the 1960s, affirmative action, which said explicitly the stated purpose of it was to help educate white students. Diversity is still argued for on those terms. Not entirely, but that is one of the major principal arguments for diversity. Have you guys heard this? If you go look at any mission statement in colleges and universities at the time, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today, they said white students, they don't put it that way, but they say it enriches is the word. Enrichment, it enriches the experience and education of the other students. Because otherwise, if we don't put black people in front of them, they'll never, the assumption is, they'll never find them themselves, and they'll just have this sort of insular, closeted worldview, and they'll be racist or something. I don't know, but that's the actual language. That's the justification for so-called diversity, which is affirmative action. Okay, so it was intended to serve white people, first of all. And it actually still is intended to serve white people, in my opinion. It makes us feel better. That's really the purpose it serves on campuses, and I know this because I've seen it. I know that's why we go and try to use my words carefully, select people of color from these, doesn't matter where they're from, as long as they're of color. Select them and bring them to our campuses is so that we will feel better and that no one can call us racist. So we've got to make sure our numbers are good. They obsess over this. I've known people in admissions committees. I've known lots of faculty who do the hiring. We need to get our numbers up so that we can't be called racist. That's what it's all about. Then, on top of that, people look at these black students on college campuses, especially like at Evergreen, and they think, oh my God, these people are insane. And they're right. But what I want to say, and I did a whole episode with Brett, which was one of my favorite things that I've ever done, because I got to say this. I hate what they're doing, and I do think a lot of what they say makes no sense at all, and it's just absolutely, there's zero evidence that there's a Ku Klux Klan on Oberlin's campus, but they believe this. They believe that their bodies are threatened on college campuses, which are the safest places physically on earth for any human being ever. For anybody of any, there has not been a single act of violence, racist violence on any college campus for more than 30 years. Not one. Not one. It's absurd. Now, having said all that, I completely get why being a black kid on one of those campuses might make you crazy, because you've been plucked for one reason only, your color, to serve the interests of all those white people up there. And in every class you sit in, you are expected, right, to serve that function. That is why you're there. John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry, everybody should listen to the Glenn show and watch or listen to their dialogues about this over many years. They're both academics, black academics at Columbia and Brown. They're like the only ones who have called this out. And they say, that's the stated purpose of this. Those kids are there to serve a function. John McWhorter has said this beautifully many times. Imagine that, knowing somehow that that's why you're there, to present the black experience, which right there is racist. There is no such thing. But even if there were, that's your job. You have a job. And you're sitting up there, and usually you're the only one, or maybe there's two of you in a class of 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 students, right? And everybody knows why you're there. They also, by the way, know that the standards have been lowered to allow black students in, and you might be one of those black kids whose test scores weren't quite high enough, but they let you in anyway to serve the function of making white people feel better about themselves. You want to talk about a corrupt system that would make me crazy as hell if I were one of those black students. Then on top of that, all the people there, certainly the faculty and a lot of the students, but I know the faculty and administrators do this, treat black students of color and faculty of color both like children. How? They never, ever challenge them, question them, debate them, argue with them, counter their points. They're like you would a kid who you know is inferior to you. If a 10-year-old argued with you and made some point, would you be like, well, that's just simply doesn't add up, young man. There is no evidence for the claim you make about 1942 and the Nazi invasion. You would say, oh, that's interesting. I'll think about that. Thank you for telling me. I've seen this over and over again. They treat black people especially, and faculty, like children. Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter have said this over and over again for about 10 years on that show. Academia has totally ignored this. You know what they say? And they start yelling because they've been treated this way and they're so brilliant. They say, you know what we want? We want to be treated like men. They're two of the smartest people you'll ever meet in your life. Glenn Lowry is like a multiple award-winning economist. He has like 8 or 10 books. He's taught at Harvard and MIT and Brown. John McWhorter's written how many books? 6 or 8, or I don't know. Geniuses by anybody's measure. And even they feel this and they see it. They get patronized, and that's the word they use. For Glenn, it's patronization for him. He says, that's the word. That's the world I live in, a world of patronization. We're treated differently, not just differently, but like kids, which may not be technically racist, but the effect of it certainly is, right? Fuck, that would make me crazy as hell.
Yeah, I completely agree. You wouldn't see that at HBCUs, right? Historically black colleges.
HBCUs are a different story, really long story. But I wanted to, but let me just, one last thing though. The reason these kids, I think, I don't want to speak for them, and I don't know that this is what goes on with them, but I think it makes sense why they have such issues and feel so threatened and attacked. The only language they have to talk about this experience is the language that's given to them by their professors about what's taught in those classes about black people. The civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and Bull Connor and the dogs and the hoses and slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and things that happened 50, 100, 150 years ago. They're really good at telling them all those stories, which are all true. But that's the only way they have to talk about this stuff. The racism of that kind, which is physical and violent and segregationist. So when they feel like they are put on some bizarre pedestal and also simultaneously patronized and talked down to in an odd way, while being given all this money to go to these schools to serve this particular function to make white people feel better. The only way they have to interpret that is to say, I feel like there's white supremacy doing violence to me, like my ancestors in Birmingham. Now, that's why I don't get mad at them. I don't get mad at them. I understand that it's the goddamn teachers and the culture generally, but it's mostly the teachers in those schools. That's the only language they give them. Do you think what I just said about affirmative action and racial liberalism on college campuses ever spoke, except for Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, and I are the only people I've ever heard of who would dare to think this. I know it happens because I've seen it. Ask them if you don't believe me. Ask 2 black faculty at Ivy League colleges who've been around for longer than I have. They totally see it this way. Of course, these kids that's the only way they can talk about this stuff. My body, violence, white supremacists,
using the language of a time that's passed.
Yeah, and you're like, what? Where? I don't see any of that.
So I had this conversation with a professor friend of mine who works at Dartmouth, right? And Dartmouth is like more conservative than a lot of the other Ivy League schools. It's in, like halfway up in New Hampshire. And a lot of people might have heard this thing that happened within the last couple of years. Like, I think it really got a lot of headlines around the time of Mizzou. It was called the demands, right? And it was a list of changes that organizations like Black Lives Matter demanded be made in higher education. And one of them was about basically restructuring the leadership in the faculty, or this is how it was presented. And this was something that a lot of conservatives and even libertarians and certainly alt-righters latched onto as being a huge problem. That that now this is getting to a point where people are saying, you want to change the leadership of the school. You want a black president or a minority, depending on who was making the demands, or you want white faculty. It sounds like this is when people start screaming white genocide and stuff like that. You're talking about taking out this white establishment faculty and replacing them with black people, and it is kind of alarming to hear those kinds of demands. But then when you think about the things that he's saying, and you think about a variety, like Dartmouth is a very white place, very conservative and quite stuffy. And you talk about being transplanted into that environment for the reasons, like the reasons of being almost in like a terrarium for other people to look at. Yeah. It's like, and then the only way people think they can relate to you is telling you stories that make you feel like you're in Mississippi in 1967, when you do have, real problems and real emotions and real observations about the things that are happening right now, but nobody can connect with you about that. A lot of these people say at Dartmouth, and this is what the professor has said, they want, like, when you're transplanted into an alien world, a faculty member, a staff member, is more than just like somebody at the front of the classroom.
Guess why? Why do you think? I mean, I can't prove this. Why do you think these kids are never told that affirmative action is a system of patronization of them, that it's built in to make them feel like children? Why do you think the faculty at these places never tell them this? Why do you think they keep talking about the hoses and the dogs in Alabama in the 1960s? Why? Because guess who invented affirmative action, and guess who keeps promoting it and keeps saying that this is the way toward racial justice and it's necessary, and if you say anything about it, you're a racist. These are the people who built the system. Of course they're not going to criticize it. They're not going to let these kids know what it actually is and potentially probably doing to those kids. I think it's damn near close to psychological torture. And they don't know it because think about that. You get a letter from Princeton. We'll give you a free education to Princeton. That's it. And that's what they get. They get often free education at elite. And by the way, all this stuff, it's all elite schools. You know that? It's all tier 1 schools where this stuff is happening. And so you're like, hell, you've got to take that offer. But then you find out that there's this weird thing going on that looks a lot. I think, that movie, I thought it was a great movie, that Jordan Peele did, the horror movie recently. What's it called? Get Out. it resonated at least with my idea of what it might be like to be an affirmative action kid on a college campus. It's like, it's not that they're not segregationists, clearly. They're integrationists of a particular kind. They're not violent, of course, obviously, against you or anyone else. There are no dogs or hoses, and there's there's nothing there like that. But boy, do all these white people treat me weird, and there's something else. They want to use my body. That's what it is. Because it's all about color. That's it. They don't care. They don't care what class you're from. They don't care what country you're from. They don't care whether you're an immigrant. The Caribbean immigrant experience, right? Oh, it's you're black, Nelson. That's it. We're done. You can have a scholarship. It's the same. Oh, we will never ask that Caribbeans often are the most anti-black American people you will ever meet in your life, right? I have known so many Jamaicans and second-generation Jamaicans and Barbadians and Trinidadians and you name, who talk shit about black Americans like you think it's a Klan meeting. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Because they all resent being lumped into the same page. It's not the same. It's bullshit.
And they talk about how blacks are lazy because they're immigrants, because they come here and they're like, have 4 jobs, right? And anyway.
The Jamaicans from In Living Color. Yeah. That's how I relate to that. So we got to wrap up.
Yeah.
Before the police are called, there's one more thing I do want to do.
I'm out of here if the police are called, that's for sure. I will be running the fuck out of here.
Don't be paranoid. It's okay. No, we're here to help you. Can you come with me? I just want to show you something.
Kevin had a great idea. You said you wanted to come up and give a testimonial about this weekend, and if other people, there's other ways we can do this too. If people don't want to get up and do it in front of everybody, I can just pass the Zoom around if anybody doesn't want to talk in front of everybody. But if I suggest, if you have something to say, if you have some thoughts, like a minute or so, then please feel free to do that. And I can always say what you want. I could always tighten it up later too.
Yeah.
So Brett picked me up from the airport, and he said, "Hey, what do you hope to get out of this weekend? Like, what are your expectations?" And I said, "I don't have any." Right? Like, and then I was thinking, like, why don't I have any? Why don't I have any expectations? How many hours is public school?
15,000.
15,000 hours of public school.
That's like the most painful number I've ever heard.
It's true, right? And so 15,000 hours of public school put me in the position where I felt like I'm going to listen to a professor. I have no expectations. Like I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. Am I going to get anything out of it, right? So I spend the entire weekend here and doing everything with you, and you're with us the whole time, and just listening to you teach. And I got to thinking, like, the whole time I was in school, because I told you at dinner, right? I told you that I hated school.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The entire time I was there. That in middle school, 6th grade, I was saying it was a prison. And my parents didn't listen to me. Nobody listened to me. They made me try college. I went to a blue ribbon high school, right? Big high school. Yeah. A high school, by the way, that took kids who were failing and sent them to another high school so that they could keep their blue ribbon status, right? Independence High School is where they got sent. I didn't get sent there. But I slept in class. I didn't care. I didn't do homework. I got C's. That's how I just made sure that I got a C. I got a diploma.
Me too.
And I left. And I went to Kennesaw State University. And the first year was everything I had just done in high school over again. And the teacher was teaching from a book. Like she was just reading the book, right? And then so having the experience here, it like clicked in my head that this experience is what I had hoped school would have been the entire time I was there. And if it had been that, who knows what would have happened, right? So that's it. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Anybody else want to do that in front of everybody? If not, there are other options.
Really, yeah. Thank you so much, and don't feel pressure. Really, that's amazing.
I'll do it. So I apologize, Kevin. I was like half listening to yours. Because I was trying to think of the story that I wanted to tell in front of everybody.
I wish I was just honest enough to say that every time that it's happened to me in my life.
It's something
Never to Kevin, but like, to so many innocent people.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bystanders. So I think it goes something like, 18, leave high school, decide I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Don't really know what that means. At that time, it was, I'm going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, learn how to program. Quickly came to that not being the thing. Thought I'd do some sort of online thing with courses or podcasts or things like that. Bought a $400 high LPR 40 microphone, and 6 months later sold it on eBay because I didn't do anything with it. And so over that time of leaving high school, going to be an entrepreneur, kind of had this momentum, maybe a little bit of excitement, a lot of uncertainty, but still this kind of belief of I'll be able to figure it out. And after a couple of years or maybe a year and a half or so, kind of spinning my wheels, kind of just, okay, I'm going to just get a job. I wanted to try to not do the job thing, but it was like, I'm not really getting anywhere, so I'm going to get a job. And worked in the restaurant industry a lot like Danny for a lot of years, working late nights, meeting interesting people, staying up, but maybe not getting these big ideas that I had into something that was real in the world other than just kind of what was going on in my head and my heart and maybe some conversations that I had. A year and a half ago, I kind of just, for a lot of different reasons, took a leap and said, okay, I've been working in restaurants. It's a lot of stuff that I learned, good experience, but it's not what I ultimately want to do. And sort of jumped into finding my way and actually got some traction. And now I do content marketing for online businesses. And that's like the entirety of my living. But in that, there's been a lot of difficult times where, as much as I love ideas, they've been a trap to not actually do anything, to just stay there in the realm of ideas and have a lot of fun with that, but not actually do the difficult work of making something different happen in the world. And so over that like last year and a half of kind of going back and forth on a lot of stuff, having like personal stuff come up, because that's going to happen when you're responsible for, hey, nobody's telling me to be here at this time to do this thing. It's I do it myself or I don't. I've gotten really into like practical stuff of what is like, how do I make a morning routine that's going to set me up to do the work that I need to do? How do I do this work technically, make stuff happen in it? And so I've been very practical and not left a lot of room for ideas. Still kind of listen to School Sucks every once in a while, but not just kind of like, yeah, ideas, cool, but really you got to work on what are you doing. And I think maybe the sort of vignette is how not on schedule we've been the past weekend of like things have shifted and topics have changed, but I've enjoyed that. And I've enjoyed just listening, and I've enjoyed just talking with people. And so it's kind of bringing back up, maybe it is okay to just talk about ideas. Maybe it's okay to just think about ideas.
I'm so fucking relieved to hear you say that.
Yeah.
I know. But no, I said there's been, because we have our two kind of conflicting personality styles, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, today, so I'll tell you what was going on in my head.
Don't tell them everything.
Well, no. But I was like, this is, I'm so fucking hungry. And when I left this morning, I only ate an egg and a half at the hotel because I thought I'd be eating at noon. And it's, and I'm sure other people feel this way.
Yeah.
But, I start to notice that I'm doing like gestures, like, stuff like that. And but he doesn't even see me. So
not even slightly.
Right. But then it's like, well, what could I do? Like how could we? It's like the same. Like it's like the time. How do we time people on the podcast stage is like a microcosm of that. Like how do you stop that? Like how it's wrong. Just let it go. And it was actually like kind of a challenge for me because I'm very like I'm orderly and organized. Like this, the fact that there's food sitting in front of me right now that I don't plan to eat is fucking agonizing. I wish it was gone. But that's how I am, and this was a good, like, I just see, oh, well, it's okay to be like this too. It was actually really, really nice. I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And when was it Kevin when no, we weren't. He messaged me before the event and he said, "Are you ready?" I said, it's ironic that I said this because I didn't always feel this way. I said, I'm being flexible. I said, I'm preparing myself. I have no expectations. And I'm preparing my mind to be like water. I've never done this before. I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm not going to, I'm just free and I'm going to let it flow.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a connection in that you don't get, and I'm totally like an on schedule kind of person too. Yeah. But I think you don't get that when the bell rings, everybody get up, we're going to lunch now.
Right. I think I'm right in between Alex and Brett on this. I think that I felt conflicted about it, and I do about this generally, which is, I mean, the bell. Fuck the bell. Like that's my whole career is built on, destroying the bell. The clock, right? I don't know if you've heard me talk about time and the invention of time in the 19th century and 18th century, but there's nothing worse than the school bell and the alarm clock at 7 a.m.
When I put a school bell in every show.
When I have to go to high school, yeah. So that's great, and I think that it's really important to let ourselves at times do this thing that you're describing, be free, and just let it flow over the boundaries and let things meander. What I don't like about myself doing that, meaning causing stuff like that to happen, is that it is disrespectful to other people who it affects. So I worry about that, but then I try to compensate by, I didn't need to compensate because I respect you guys. And so, it's like, I felt like, I was going to give my all no matter what. If I showed up at 11 or 11:30, my whole body was going to be here, my soul. So, I felt like I still worried about it, but I knew I wasn't going to cheat you and I was going to show you respect. But I do think, I don't know what to do with myself on this. I don't know.
Maybe just let it be.
Well, I don't know. See, it's the thing about so the Puritan work ethic, Alex, is the belief in work as a good in itself. And I know you're not talking about that. So but I know that we need to do work and we have to have some structures and some boundaries. And maybe this is a thing that unschoolers and all of us need to be. It's kind of a problem, with the liberty movement and libertarians or anybody who cares about personal individual freedom. That's kind of a thing you run up against every single day, right? And I do all the time. I realize now that I was just built to push boundaries that are put around me. I don't know where it comes from. I really don't. I just can't stand them. And I even unconsciously, that's being late all the time. Unconsciously, I'm just always pushing stuff. And I'm not trying to be a rebel at all. I just do it. And I hate myself often for doing it. So I don't know. I really don't know what to do about this. But I think for a weekend like this, here's the thing. Voluntary participation, mutual aid and all that. We all basically agreed to spend, from Friday night to now, doing this together, right? And, you know, I feel like as long as we did that, it didn't matter exactly how it lined up or stacked up. And I told you guys everything I was planning on telling you times 4. So, I mean, you know, there's nothing, yeah, for this, it's great. In regular life with the normies, is that what we call them? It's difficult. And even with each other, right? You got to have some rules.
No, I would say, but like,
We play games, we have to have rules.
Yeah.
Or else there's no game.
but I learned a lot about how to do something like this in the future. Like,
Yeah.
be there at 9, be fed.
Nah.
We'll eat in the afternoon.
You still got to
some
make
point.
me, you got to put some.
No, but I think there's something in between.
Some barriers around me, you know. But yeah,
Right.
yeah,
well,
yeah.
maybe it needs to be short of alarms.
Which you did. It was
alarms
the
going
barriers were called Alex. You made Alex
Yes,
be
I did.
get me on time.
I was an
to
enforcer.
this place. Yeah,
That's-
he did a pretty good job at it too.
on. Cool. That's awesome.
It's the first time I was on time the whole weekend. Just saying, it's really your fault, Brett.
Yeah.
I can teach you some of the techniques later.
Yeah.
So this portion of the show was called testimonials. And now, if anybody else wants to do that, I will have my Zoom, and or there's other ways to do it as well. But I'd like to get them while we're here. So sometime tonight. Just yeah. No, I'm thinking like it's going to take me like a half hour to break all this stuff down. So if anybody else wants to do it, there will be an opportunity to do it. If that's
Oh,
all right.
sure.
So this has been School Sucks and Unregistered podcast live from Endicott College and a weekend with Thaddeus Russell. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. This was the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. Please don't forget to check out unregisteredlisteners.com to support the show. Thanks for listening.